Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, you wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8. We're gonna read some more Agatha Christie and Then There Were None. And yes, there is a black screen. We'll keep it the black screen for the moment until we actually return to Umineko and proper. I'm going to read the rest of Agatha Christie and Then There Were None. I'm then going to read a story called The Tragedy of X by Ellery Queen. And then there is a story, which apparently was, as far as if I'm correct, was written in 2017 called When Cicadas Cry. Given the title of Umineko, when they cry, when the seagulls cry, and Higurashi, when the Higurashi cry, which means cicadas. I saw this and I was like, huh. But that being said, it was written by Caroline Cleveland, I believe in 2017. And I don't know if this person even knows Higurashi and Umineko exist. I'll read the back and maybe the first sentence of this book. And like I said, the reason why I'm doing this in the middle of Umineko is Umineko was inspired by a lot of detective novels, particularly, Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None takes place on a mansion on an island, much like so. And I had not read the Agatha Christie book. Not read any of these books. Now, that being said, I did try to find some books. Like I said, we do have the book by Agatha Christie, and we do have this surprise book by Caroline Cleveland, which is the same genre of murder mystery thing, but it's a detective story. But again, I don't know if this person even knows Higurashi exists, let alone any of that. So it's just odd given the title. So I figured I would try it. Like I said, that one's also a detective murder mystery thing, so don't know if that person even knows Higurashi and Umineko exist. Ellery Queen, The Tragedy of X, which I'll hop into after the Agatha Christie book, and then I'll go to When Cicadas Cry. After that, we will return to Umineko and proper. I just felt that these would be, I felt they would add to Umineko, so I felt they were part of it. Though they will have a black screen for a background, so I'll just be reading the books. We'll have proper background screen again when we return to Umineko. Also, at some point, it will play Union Rhythm Psychosis whenever it comes out. But that's like a Denpa brain rot game. It's made by the same people who made Needy Streamer Overload. So it may be a little bit unhinged by some people's viewpoints, but that's fine. I've played a few parts of the demo and stuff. So there's a few videos on it already on the channel. I did try to find some other authors that were referenced in terms of Umineko, like S.S. Van Dyne. Even tried looking up by his name Willard. Also, there was John Dixon Carr. There was Ronald Knox. And I feel like there was another name I looked up and I couldn't find. But we at least found these novels. So, like I said, When Cicadas Cry. Like I said, Agatha Christie, we've already read a decent amount of that book. And Then There Were None. The When the Cicadas Cry, I don't know what it's about. We'll hop into it for a second. We'll just read the first sentence. I never meant to kill the first one. She was an accident, her own fault for the most part. And the second one, she was a casualty of necessity. That might be an interesting story. Again, I still want more Higurashi and more Umineko, even though I haven't even finished Umineko. And, well, probably not getting more of those. But again, I felt that these would be part of it. Though, again, I mean, occasionally I'll hop into different things. And sometimes I'll either go on tangents or sometimes I'll make videos that are just more of a blog sort of thing. Like, I've made videos that are karaoke, and I've let's played a bunch of games like Super Meat Boy and Splasher, which consist of a lot of me cussing. But let's go and hop back into the Agatha Christie book. I'm wanting to try to finish all start the other two. I'm trying to want to finish I want to finish this book, and I want to read both of the other books this weekend. So it's going to be quite a bit of reading. Hopefully I don't lose my voice or anything. My nose was itchy. Lombard said, "He got up all right," Vera said in a low voice, which she tried to make firm and assured. "You don't think he's hiding somewhere, waiting for us?" Lombard said, "My dear girl, I'm prepared to think anything of anyone. My advice is that we keep together until we find him." Armstrong said, "He must be out on the island somewhere." Bloor, who had joined them, dressed but still unshaved, said, "Where's Miss Brent got to? That's another mystery." But as they arrived in the hall, Emily Brent came in through the front door. She had on a mackintosh, she said. "The sea is as high as ever. I shouldn't think any boat could put out today." Bloor said, "Have you been wandering about the island alone, Miss Brent? Don't you realize that's an exceedingly foolish thing to do?" Emily Brent said, "I assure you, Mr. Bloor, that I kept an extremely sharp lookout." Bloor grunted. He said, "Seen anything of Rogers?" Miss Brent's eyebrows rose. "Rogers? No, I haven't seen him this morning. Why?" Mr. Justice Wargrave, shaved, dressed, and with his false teeth in position, came down the stairs. He moved to the open dining room door. He said, "Ha! Laid the table for breakfast, I see." Lombard said he might have done that last night. They all moved inside the room, looking at the neatly set plates and cutlery, at the row of cups on the sideboard, at the felt mats placed ready for the coffee urn. It was Vera who saw it first. She caught the judge's arm, and the grip of her athletic fingers made the old gentleman wince. She cried out, "The soldiers, look!" There were only 6 china figures in the middle of the table. They found him shortly afterwards. He was in the little wash house across the yard. He had been chopping sticks in preparation for lighting the kitchen fire. The small chopper was still in his hands. A big chopper, a heavy affair, was leaning against the door. The metal of it stained a dull brown. It corresponded only too well with the deep wound in the back of Roger's head. Well, I mean, this probably tells us that he died a long time ago. I mean, if it's already perfectly clear, said Armstrong, the murderer must have crept up behind him, swung the chopper once, and brought it down on his head as he was bending over. Bloor was busy on the handle of the chopper and the flour sifter from the kitchen. Mr. Justice Wargrave asked, "Would it have needed great force, Doctor?" Armstrong said gravely, "A woman could have done it, if that's what you mean." He gave a quick glance around. Vera Claythorne and Emily Brent had retired to the kitchen. "The girl could have done it easily. She's an athletic type. In appearance, Miss Brent is a fragile-looking, but the type of woman has often a lot of wiry strength, and you must remember that anyone who's mentally unhinged has a good deal of unsuspected strength." The judge nodded thoughtfully. Bloor rose to his knees with a sigh. He said, "No fingerprints. Handle was wiped afterwards." A sound of laughter was heard. They turned sharply. Vera Claythorne was standing in the yard. She cried out in a high, shrill voice, shaken with the wild bursts of laughter. "Do they keep bees on this island? Tell me that. Where do we go for honey? Ha, ha." They stared at her uncomprehendingly. It was as though the sane, well-balanced girl had gone mad before their eyes. She went on in that high, unnatural voice. "Don't stare like that as though you thought I was mad. It's sane enough what I'm asking. Bees, hives, bees. Oh, don't you understand? Haven't you read that idiotic rhyme? It's up in all your bedrooms, put there for you to study. We might have come here straightway if we had had sense. 7 little soldier boys chopping up sticks." And the next verse, I know the whole thing by heart. I tell you, 6 little soldier boys playing with a hive. That's why I'm asking, do they keep bees on this island? Isn't it funny? Isn't it damned funny? She began laughing wildly again. Dr. Armstrong strode forward. He raised his hand and struck her a flat blow on the cheek. She gasped, hiccuped, and swallowed. She stood motionless a minute. Then she said, "Thank you. I'm all right now." Her voice was once more, calm and controlled, the voice of the efficient games mistress. She turned and went across the yard into the kitchen, saying, "Miss Brent and I are getting you breakfast. Can you bring some sticks to light the fire?" The marks of the doctor's hand stood out red on her cheek. As she went into the kitchen, Blore said, "Well, you dealt with that all right, Doctor." Armstrong said apologetically, "Had to. We can't cope with hysteria on top of everything else." Philip Lombard said, "She's not a hysterical type." Armstrong agreed. "Oh, no, good, healthy, sensible girl. Just the sudden shock. It might happen to anybody." Rogers had chopped a certain amount of firewood before he had been killed. They gathered it up and took it into the kitchen. Vera and Emily Brent were busy. Miss Brent was raking out the stove. Vera was cutting the rind off the bacon. Emily Brent said, "What do you mean cutting the rind off the bacon?" Half of all my videos is going to be me struggling to turn pages in a book. "Thank you. We'll be as quick as we can. Say half an hour to 3/4. The kettle's got to boil." Ex-Inspector Blore said in a low, hoarse voice to Philip Lombard, "Know what I'm thinking?" Philip Lombard said, as you're just about to tell me, it's not worth the trouble of guessing." Ex-Inspector Blore was an earnest man. A light touch was incomprehensible to him. He went on heavily. There was a case in America. Old gentleman and his wife, both killed with an axe. Middle of the morning, nobody in the house but the daughter and the maid. Maid, it was proved, couldn't have done it. Daughter was a respectable, middle-aged spinster. I feel like those words don't belong together. Seemed incredible. So incredible that they acquitted her, but they never found any other explanation. He paused. "I thought of that when I saw the axe, and then when I came into the kitchen and saw her there, so neat and calm, hadn't turned a hair, that girl coming all over hysterical." "Well, that's natural. The sort of thing you'd expect, don't you think?" Philip Lombard said, "I don't know what that means." Laconically? I don't think I've ever seen that word before. Okay, time to hop on Google and to annoy Google. The fuck is laconically? I've never even heard of that. Laconic. Adjective. Describes using few words to express thoughts. Isn't that ad-lib to a degree? I know sometimes that refers to an improvisation, but often appearing curt, blunt, or mysteriously brief. It implies a concise or terse style, often for efficiency, although it can sometimes seem blunt. The term stems from the ancient Sparta, where citizens were famous for their extreme brevity of speech. Okay. It might be, Blore went on, but the other, so neat and prim, wrapped up in that apron, Mrs. Rogers' apron, I suppose, saying breakfast will be ready in half an hour or so. If you ask me, that woman's as mad as a hatter. Lots of elderly spinsters go that way. I don't mean go in for homicide on the grand scale, but go queer in their heads. Unfortunately, it's taken her this way. Religious mania. Thinks she's God's instrument. Something of that kind. She sits in her room, reading her Bible. Philip Lombard sighed and said, that's hardly proof positive of an unbalanced mentality, Blore. But Blore went on, ploddingly, perseveringly. And then she was out, in her mackintosh, said she'd been down to look at the sea. The other shook his head. He said Rogers was killed as he was chopping firewood. That is to say, first thing when he got up, the Brent wouldn't have needed to wander about outside for hours afterwards, if you ask me. The murderer of Rogers would take jolly good care to be rolled up in bed snoring. Unless you're using the rain from the storm to get washed up. Blore said, you're missing the point. But you're missing the point. Mr. Lombard, if the woman was innocent, she'd be too dead scared to go wandering about by herself. She'd only do that if she knew that she had nothing to fear. That's to say, if she herself is the criminal. Philip Lombard said, that's a good point. Yes, I hadn't thought of that. He added with a faint grin, glad you don't still suspect me. Blore said rather shamefacedly, I did start by thinking of you, that revolver, and the queer story you told, or didn't tell, but I've realized now that was... Damn. Really a bit too obvious. He paused and said, hope you feel the same about me. Philip said thoughtfully, I may be wrong, of course, but I can't feel that you've got enough imagination for this job. All I can say is, if you're the criminal, you're a damned fine actor, and I take my hat off to you. It reminds me of like the Jake from Finn and Jake. It's like, this bed's obviously a trap, but I don't care. Hats off to you. Splendid trap. It was a success. I keep losing my position in the reading. He lowered his voice. Just between ourselves, Blore. And taking into account that we'll probably both be a couple of stiffs before another day is out, you did indulge in that spot of perjury, I suppose. Blore shifted uneasily from one foot to another. He said at last, doesn't seem to make much odds now. Oh well, here goes. Landor was innocent right enough. The gang had got me squared, and between us we got him put away for a stretch. Mind you, I wouldn't admit this if there were any witnesses, finished Lombard with a grin. It's just between you and me. Well, I hope you made a tidy bit out of it. Didn't make what I should have done. Mean crowd, the Purcell gang. I got my promotion, though, and Landor got penal servitude and died in prison. I couldn't know he was going to die, could I? Demanded Blore. No, that was your bad luck. Mine. His, you mean? Yours too, because as a result of it, it looks as though your own life is going to be cut unpleasantly short. Me? Blore stared at him. Do you think I'm going to go the way of Rogers and the rest of them? Not me. I'm watching out for myself pretty carefully, I can tell you. Lombard said, oh, well, I'm not a betting man. And anyway, if you were dead, I wouldn't get paid. Look here, Mr. Lombard, what do you mean? Philip Lombard showed his teeth. He said, I mean, my dear Blore, that in my opinion, you haven't got a chance. What? Your lack of imagination is going to make you absolutely a sitting target. A criminal of the imagination of you and Owen can make rings around you any time he or she wants to. Blore's face went crimson. He demanded angrily, and what about you? Philip Lombard's face went hard and dangerous. He said, I've got a pretty good imagination of my own. I've been in tight places before now, and got out of them. I think, I won't say more than that, but I think I'll get out of this one. The eggs were in the frying pan. Vera, toasting bread, thought to herself, did I make a hysterical fool of myself? That was a mistake. Keep calm, my girl. Keep calm. After all, she'd always prided herself on her level-headedness. Miss Claythorne was wonderful. Kept her head, started off swimming after Cyril at once. Why think of that now? All that was over Cyril had. Disappeared long before she got near the rock. She had felt the current take her, sweeping her out to sea. She had let herself go with it, swimming quietly, floating till the boat arrived at last. They had praised her courage and her sang-froid, but not Hugo. Hugo had just looked at her. God, how it hurt, even now, to think of Hugo. Where was he? What was he doing? Was he engaged? Married? Emily Brent said sharply, Vera, that toast is burning. Oh, sorry, Miss Brent, so it is. How stupid of me. Emily Brent lifted out the last egg from the sizzling fat. Vera, putting a fresh piece of bread on the toasting fork, said curiously, You're wonderfully calm, Miss Brent. Emily Brent said, pressing her lips together, I was brought up to keep my head and never to make a fuss. Vera thought mechanically, I was about to say melancholy. Repressed as a child, that accounts for a lot. She said, Aren't you afraid? She paused and then added, Or don't you mind dying? Dying, it was as though a sharp little gimlet had run into the solid, congealed mess of Emily Brent's brain. Dying? But she wasn't going to die. The others would die, yes, but not she, Emily Brent. This girl didn't understand. Emily Brent wasn't afraid, naturally. None of the Brents were afraid. All of her people were service people. They faced death unflinchingly. They led upright lives just as she. Emily Brent had led an upright life. She had never done anything to be ashamed of, and so naturally she wasn't going to die. The Lord is mindful of his own. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day. It was daylight now. There was no terror. We shall none of us leave this island. Who had said that? General MacArthur, of course, whose cousin had married Elsie Macpherson. He hadn't seemed to care. He had seemed actually to welcome the idea. Wicked, almost impious to feel that way. Some people thought so little of death that they actually took their own lives. Beatrice Taylor. Last night, She had dreamed of Beatrice, dreamt that she was outside pressing her face against the window and moaning, asking to be let in, but Emily Brent hadn't wanted to let her in, because if she did, something terrible would happen. Emily came to herself with a start. That girl was looking at her very strangely. She said in a brisk voice, "Everything's ready, isn't it? We'll take the breakfast in." Breakfast was a curious meal. Everyone was very polite. "May I get you some more coffee, Miss Brent? Miss Claythorne, a slice of ham, another piece of toast." 6 people, all outwardly self-possessed and normal. And within, thoughts that ran around in a circle like squirrels in a cage. What's next? What next? Who? Which? Methodical, exacting, and worst of all, patient. Would it work, I wonder? It's worth trying if there's time. My God, if there's time. Religious mania, that's the ticket. Looking at her, though, you can hardly believe it. Suppose I'm wrong. It's crazy. Everything's crazy. I'm going crazy. Wool disappearing, red silk curtains. It doesn't make sense. I can't get the hang of it. That damned fool, he believed every word I said to him. It was easy. I must be careful, though. Very careful. 6 of those little china figures. Only 6. How many will there be by tonight? Who'll have the last egg? Marmalade? Thanks. Can I cut you some bread? 6 people behaving normally at breakfast. Chapter 12. The meal was over. Mr. Justice Wargrave cleared his throat. He said in a small, authoritative voice, "It would be advisable, I think, if we met to discuss the situation. Shall we say in half an hour's time in the drawing room?" Everyone made a sound suggestive of agreement. Vera began to pile plates together. She said, "I'll clear away and wash up." Philip Lombard said, "We'll bring the stuff out to the pantry for you." Thanks. Emily Brent, rising to her feet, sat down again. She said, "Oh dear." The judge said, "Anything the matter, Miss Brent?" Emily said apologetically, "I'm sorry. I'd like to help Miss Claythorne, but I don't know how it is. I feel just a little giddy." "Giddy, eh?" Dr. Armstrong came towards her. "Quite natural, delayed shock. I can give you something to—" "No!" The word burst from her lips like an exploding shell. It took everyone aback. Dr. Armstrong flushed a deep red. There was no mistaking the fear and suspicion in her face. He said stiffly, "Just as you please, Miss Brent." She said, "I don't wish to take anything at all. I will just sit here quietly till the giddiness passes off." They finished clearing away the breakfast things. Bloor said, "I am a domestic sort of man. I'll give you a hand, Miss Claythorne." Vera said thank you. Emily Brent was left alone, sitting in the dining room. For a while she heard a faint murmur of voices from the pantry. The giddiness was passing. She felt drowsy now, as though she could easily go to sleep. There was a buzzing in her ears, or was it a real buzzing in the room? She thought, "It's like a bee, a bumblebee." Presently she saw the bee. It was crawling up the window pane. Vera Claythorne had talked about bees this morning. Bees and honey. She liked honey. Honey in the comb. And strain it yourself through a muslin bag. Drip, drip, drip. There was somebody in the room. Somebody all wet and dripping. Beatrice Taylor from the river. She had only to turn her head and she would see her, the fiend. But she couldn't turn her head if she were to call out, but she couldn't call out. There was no one else in the house. She was all alone. She heard footsteps, soft, dragging footsteps coming up behind her, the stumbling footsteps of the drowned girl. There was a wet, dank smell in her nostrils. On the window pane the bee was buzzing, and then she felt the prick, the bee sting on the side of her neck. In the drawing room, they were waiting for Emily Brent. Vera Claythorne said, "Shall I go and fetch her?" Bloor said quickly, "Just a minute." Vera sat down again. Everyone looked inquiringly at Bloor. He said, "Look here, everybody. My opinion's this. We needn't look we needn't look farther for the author of these damn deaths than the dining room at this minute. I'd take my oath that woman's the one we're after. Armstrong said, and the motive? Religious mania. What do you say, Doctor? Armstrong said, it's perfectly possible. I have nothing to say against it, but of course we've no proof. Vera said she was very odd in the kitchen when we were getting breakfast. Her eyes, she shivered. Lombard said, you can't judge her by that. We're all a bit off our heads by now. Blore said, there's another thing. She's the only one who wouldn't give an explanation after that gramophone record. Why? Because she hadn't any to give. Vera stirred in her chair. She said, that's not quite true. She told me afterwards. Wargrave said, what did she tell you, Miss Claythorne? Vera repeated the story of Beatrice Taylor. Mr. Justice Wargrave observed, a perfectly straightforward story. I personally should have no difficulty in accepting it. Tell me, Miss Claythorne, did she appear to be troubled by a sense of guilt or a feeling remorse for her attitude in the matter? None whatever, said Vera. She was completely unmoved. Blore said, hearts as hard as flints, these righteous spinsters. Envy, mostly. Mr. Justice Wargrave said, it is now 5 minutes to 11. I think we should summon Miss Brent to join our conclave. Blore said, aren't you going to take any action? The judge said, I fail to see what action we can take. Our suspicions are, at the moment, only suspicions. I will, however, ask Dr. Armstrong to observe Miss Brent's demeanor very carefully. Let us now go into the dining room. They found Emily Brent sitting in the chair in which they had left her. From behind they saw nothing amiss, except that she did not seem to hear their entrance into the room. And then they saw her face. Sophist, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Sophist, with blood, with blue lips and starting eyes. Blore said, my God, she's dead. The small, quiet voice of Mr. Justice Wargrave said, one more of us acquitted. Too late. Armstrong was bent over the dead woman. He sniffed the lips, shook his head, peered into the eyelids. Lombard said impatiently, how did she die, Doctor? She was all right when we left her here. Armstrong's attention was riveted on a mark on the right side of her neck. He said, that's the mark of a hypodermic syringe. There was a buzzing sound from the window. Vera cried, look, a bee, a bumblebee. Remember what I said this morning? Armstrong said grimly, it wasn't that bee that stung her. A human hand held the syringe. That'd be fucking terrifying if bees actually had, like, were bigger. The judge asked what poison was injected. Armstrong answered, at a guess, one of the cyanides, probably potassium cyanide. Same as Anthony Marston. She must have died almost immediately by asphyxiation. Vera cried, but that bee, it can't be coincidence. Lombard said grimly, oh no, it isn't coincidence. It's our murderous touch of local color. He's a playful beast, likes to stick to his damnable nursery jingle as closely as possible. For the first time his voice was uneven, almost shrill. It was as though even his nerves, seasoned by a long career of hazards and dangerous undertakings, had given out at last. He said violently, it's mad, absolutely mad, we're all mad. The judge said calmly, we have still, I hope, our reasoning powers. Did anyone bring a hypodermic syringe to this house? Dr. Armstrong, straightening himself, said in a voice not too well assured, yes, I did. 4 pairs of eyes fastened on him. He braced himself against the deep, hostile suspicion of those eyes. He said, "Always travel with one. Most doctors do." Mr. Justice Wargrave said calmly, "Quite so. Will you tell us, Doctor, where that syringe is now?" "In the suitcase in my room." Wargrave said, "We might perhaps verify that fact." The 5 of them went upstairs, a silent procession. The contents of the suitcase were turned out on the floor. The hypodermic syringe was not there. Armstrong said violently, "Somebody must have taken it." There was silence in the room. Armstrong stood with his back to the window. 4 pairs of eyes were on him, black with suspicion and accusation. He looked from Wargrave to Vera and repeated helplessly, weakly, "I tell you, someone must have taken it." Bloor was looking at Lombard, who returned his gaze. The judge said, "There are 5 of us here in this room. Only one of us is a murderer. The position is fraught with grave danger. Everything must be done in order to safeguard the 4 of us who are innocent. I will now ask you, Dr. Armstrong, what drugs you have in your possession." Armstrong replied, "I have a small medicine case here. You can examine it. You will find some sleeping stuff, Trianol, and sulfonal tablets, a packet of bromide, bicarbonate of soda, aspirin, nothing else. I have no cyanide in my possession." The judge said, "I have myself some sleeping tablets, sulfonal. I think they are. I presume they would be lethal if a sufficiently large dose were given. You, Mr. Lombard, have in your possession a revolver." Philip Lombard said sharply, "What if I have? Only this. I propose that the doctor's supply of drugs, my own sulfonal tablets, and your revolver, and anything else of the nature of drugs or firearms should be collected together and placed in a safe place. That after this is done, we should each of us submit to a search, both of our persons and of our effects." Lombard said, "I'm damned if I'll give up my revolver." Wargrave said sharply, "Mr. Lombard, you are a very strongly built and powerful young man, but ex-Inspector Bloor is also a man of powerful physique. I do not know what the outcome of a struggle between you would be, but I can tell you this, on Bloor's side, assisting him to the best of our ability will be myself, Dr. Armstrong, and Miss Claythorne. You will appreciate, therefore, that the odds against you, if you choose to resist, will be somewhat heavy." Lombard threw his head back. His teeth showed in what was almost a snarl. "Oh, very well then, since you've got it all taped out." Mr. Justice Wargrave nodded his head. "You are a sensible young man. Where is this revolver of yours?" "In the drawer of the table by my bed." "Good, I'll fetch it. I think it would be desirable if we went with you," Philip said with a smile that was still nearer a snarl. "Suspicious devil, aren't you?" They went along the corridor to Lombard's room. Philip strode across the bed to the table, jerked open the drawer, then he recoiled with an oath. The drawer of the bed table was empty. "Satisfied?" asked Lombard. He had stripped to the skin, and he and his room had been meticulously searched by the other 3 men. Vera Claythorne was outside in the corridor. The search proceeded methodically. In turn, Armstrong, the judge, and Bloor submitted to the same test. The 4 men emerged from Bloor's room and approached Vera. It was the judge who spoke. "I hope you will understand, Miss Claythorne, that we can make no exceptions. That revolver must be found. You have, I presume, a bathing dress on you? With you?" Vera nodded. "Then I will ask you to go into your room and put it on, and then come out to us here." If she has the gun, wouldn't she just, throw it in her room then? Vera, even if the person has the gun, why would they be carrying the gun with them? Vera went into her room and shut the door. She reappeared in under a minute, dressed in a tight-fitting, silk-rucked bathing dress. Wargrave nodded approval. "Thank you, Miss Claythorne. Now, if you will remain here, we will search your room." Vera waited patiently in the corridor until they emerged. Then she went in dressed, and came out to where they were waiting. The judge said, "We are now assured of one thing. There are no lethal weapons or drugs in the possession of any of us 5. That is 1 point to the good. We will now place the drugs in a safe. There is, I think, a silver chest, is there not, in the pantry?" Bloor said, "That's all very well, but who's to have the key? You, I suppose." Mr. Justice Wargrave made no reply. He went down to the pantry, and the others followed him. There was a small case there designed for the purpose of holding silver and plate, but by the judge's directions, the various drugs were placed in this, and it was locked. Then, still in Wargrave's instructions, the chest was lifted into the plate cupboard, and this turn was locked. Then the judge gave the key to the chest to Philip Lombard and the key to the cupboard to Bloor. He said, "You two are the strongest physically. It would be difficult for either of you to get the key from the other. It would be impossible for any of us 3 to do so. To break open the cupboard or the plate chest would be a noisy, cumbersome proceeding, and one which could hardly be carried out without attention being attracted to what was going on." He paused, then went on, "We are still faced by one very grave problem. What has become of Mr. Lombard's revolver?" Bloor said, "Seems to me its owner is the most likely person to know that." A white dint showed in Philip Lombard's nostrils. He said, "You damned pig-headed fool, I tell you it's been stolen from me." Wargrave asked, "When did you last see it?" "Last night. It was in the drawer when I went to bed, ready in case anything happened." The judge nodded. He said, "It must have been taken this morning during the confusion of searching for Rogers or after his dead body was discovered." Vera said, "It must be hidden somewhere about the house. We must look for it." Mr. Justice Wargrave's finger was stroking his chin. He said, "I doubt if our search will result in anything. Our murderer has had plenty of time to devise a hiding place. I do not fancy we shall find that revolver easily." Bloor said forcefully, "I don't know where the revolver is, but I'll bet I know where something else is. That hypodermic syringe. Follow me." He opened the front door and led the way around the house. A little distance away from the dining room window, he found the syringe. Beside it was a smashed china figure, a 6th broken soldier boy. Bloor said in a satisfied voice, "Only place it could be after he'd killed her." He'd opened the window and threw out the syringe and picked up the china figure from the table and followed on with that. There were no prints on the syringe. It had been carefully wiped. Vera said in a determined voice, "Now let us look for that revolver." Mr. Justice Wargrave said, "By all means, but in doing so, let us be careful to keep together. Remember, if we separate, the murderer gets his chance." They searched the house carefully from attic to cellars, but without result. The revolver was still missing. One of us, one of us, one of us. Chapter 13. 3 words endlessly repeated, dinning themselves hour after hour into receptive brains. 5 people, 5 frightened people, 5 people who watched each other, who now hardly troubled to hide their state of nervous tension. There was little pretense now, no formal veneer of conversation. They were 5 enemies linked together by a mutual instinct of self-preservation, and all of them suddenly looked less like human beings. They were reverting to more bestial types. Like a wary old tortoise, Mr. Justice Wargrave had sat hunched up, his body motionless. His eyes keen and alert. Ex-Inspector Bloor looked coarser and clumsier in build. His walk was that of a slow, padding animal. His eyes were bloodshot. There was a look of a mingled ferocity and stupidity about him. He was like a beast at bay, ready to charge its pursuers. Philip Lombard's senses seemed heightened rather than diminished. His ears reacted to the slightest sound, his step was lighter and quicker, his body was lithe and graceful, and he smiled often, his lips curling back from his long white teeth. Vera Claythorne was very quiet. She sat most of the time huddled in a chair. Her eyes stared ahead of her into space. She looked dazed. She was like a bird that has dashed its head against glass and that has been picked up by a human hand. It crouches there, terrified, unable to move, hoping to save itself by its immobility. Armstrong was in a pitiable condition of nerves. He twitched and his hands shook. He lighted cigarette after cigarette and stubbed them out almost immediately. The forced inaction of their position seemed to gall him more than the others. Every now and then he broke out into a torrent of nervous speech. We shouldn't just sit here doing nothing. There must be something. Surely there is something that we can do. If we lit a bonfire. Blore said heavily. In this weather, the rain was pouring down again. The wind came in fitful gusts. The depressing sound of the pattering rain nearly drove them mad. By tacit consent, they had adopted a plan of campaign. They all sat in the big drawing room. Only one person left the room at a time. The other four waited till the fifth return. Lombard said, "It's only a question of time. The weather will clear. Then we can do something. Signal, light fires, make a raft, something." Armstrong said with a sudden cackle of laughter, "A question of time. Time. We can't afford time. We shall all be dead." Mr. Justice Wargrave said, and his small, clear voice was heavy with passionate determination, "Not if we are careful. We must be very careful." The midday meal had been duly eaten, but there had been no conventional formality about it. All five of them had gone to the kitchen. In the larder they had found a great store of tinned foods. They had opened a tin of tongue and 2 tins of fruit. They had eaten standing around the kitchen table. Then they herding close together. They had returned to the drawing room to sit watching each other, and by now the thoughts that ran through their brains were abnormal, feverish, diseased. "It's Armstrong. I saw him looking at me sideways just then. His eyes are mad, quite mad. Perhaps he isn't a doctor at all. That's it, of course. He's a lunatic, escaped from some doctor's house, pretending to be a doctor. It's true. Shall I tell them? Shall I scream out? No, it won't do to put him on his guard. Besides, he can seem so sane. What time is it? Only 3:15. Oh, God, I shall go mad myself. Yes, it's Armstrong. He's watching me now. They won't get me. I can take care of myself. I've been in tight places before. Where the hell was that revolver? Who took it? Who's got it? Nobody's got it. We know that. We were all searched. Nobody can have it. But somebody knows where it is. They're going mad. They all go mad, afraid of death. We're all afraid of death. I am afraid of death. Yes. But that doesn't stop death coming. The hearse is at the door, sir. Where did I read that? The girl? The girl? Oh, I'll watch the girl, yes. I'll watch the girl. 20 to 4, only 20 to 4. Perhaps the clock has stopped. I don't understand. No, I don't understand. This sort of thing can't happen. It is happening. Why don't we wake up? Wake up. Judgment Day. No, not that. Oh, if only I could think. My head, something's happening in my bed. It's going to burst. It's going to split. This sort of thing can't happen. What's the time? Oh, God, it's only 4:15. I must keep my head. If only I keep my head, it's all perfectly clear, all worked out. But nobody must suspect. It may do the trick. It must. Which one? That's the question. Which one? I think yes. I rather think yes, it's him. When the clock struck 5, they all jumped. Vera said, "Does anyone want tea?" There was a moment's silence. Blore said, "I'd like a cup." Vera rose. She said, "I'll go and make it. You can all stay here." Mr. Justice Wargrave said, "I think, my dear young lady, we would all prefer to come and watch you make it." Vera stared, then gave a short, rather hysterical laugh. She said, "Of course you would." 5 people went into the kitchen. Tea was made and drunk by Vera and Blore. The other 3 had whiskey, opening a fresh bottle and using a siphon from a nailed-up case. The judge murmured with a reptilian smile, "We must be very careful." They went back again to the drawing room. Although it was summer, the room was dark. Lombard switched on the lights, but they did not come on. He said, "Of course, the engine's not been run today since Rogers hasn't been there to see to it." He hesitated and said, "We could go out and get it going, I suppose." Mr. Justice Wargrave said, "There are packets of candles in the larder. I saw them. Better use those." Lombard went out. The other 4 sat watching each other. He came back with a box of candles and a pile of saucers. 5 candles were lit and placed about the room. The time was 6:15. At 6:20, Vera felt that to sit there longer was unbearable. She would go to her room and bathe her aching head and temples in cold water. She got up and went towards the door. Then she remembered and came back and got a candle out of the box. She lighted it and let a little wax pour into a saucer and stuck the candle firmly to it. Then she went out of the room, shutting the door behind her and leaving. The four men inside. She went up the stairs and along the passage to her room. As she opened her door, she suddenly halted and stood stock still. Her nostrils quivered. The smell of the sea at St. Tradenick. That was it. She could not be mistaken. Of course, one smelt the sea on an island anyway, but this was different. It was the smell that there had been there on the beach that day, with the tide out and the rocks covered with seaweed dying in the sun. Can I swim out to the island, Miss Claythorne? Why can't I swim out to the island? Horrid, whiny, spoiled little brat. If it weren't for him, Hugo would be rich, able to marry the girl he loved. Hugo. Surely, Hugo was beside her. No, waiting for her in the room. She made a step forward. The draft from the window caught the flame of the candle. It flickered and went out. In the dark, she was suddenly afraid. Don't be a fool, Vera, Claythorne urged herself. It's all right. The others are downstairs, all four of them. There's no one in the room. There can't be. You're imagining things, my girl. But that smell, the smell of the beach at St. Tredenick's, that wasn't imagined. It was true. There was someone in the room. She had heard something. Surely she had heard something. And then as she stood there listening, a cold, clammy hand touched her throat. A wet hand smelling of the sea. Vera screamed. She screamed and screamed and screams of the utmost terror, wild, desperate cries for help. She did not hear the sounds from below, of a chair being overturned, of a door opening, of men's feet running up the stairs. She was conscious only of supreme terror. Then, restoring her sanity, lights flickered in the doorway, candles, men hurrying into the room. What the devil? What's happened? Good God, what is it? She shuddered, took a step forward, collapsed on the floor. She was only half aware of someone bending over her, of someone forcing her head down between her knees. Then, at a sudden exclamation, a quick, "My God, look at that!" Her senses returned. She opened her eyes and raised her head. She saw what it was the men with the candles were looking at. A broad ribbon of wet seaweed was hanging down from the ceiling. It was as though that which in the darkness had swayed against her throat, it was that which she had taken for a clammy hand. A drowned hand came back from the dead to squeeze the life out of her. She began to laugh hysterically. She said it was seaweed, only seaweed, and that's what that smell was. And then the faintness came over her once more, waves and waves of sickness again. Someone took her head and forced it between her knees. Eons of time seemed to pass. They were offering her something to drink, passing the glass against her lips. She smelt brandy. She was just about to gulp the spirit gratefully down when suddenly a warning note like an animal bell sounded in her brain. She sat up, pushing the glass away. She said sharply, "Where did this come from?" Blor's voice answered. He stared a minute before speaking. He said, "I got it from downstairs." Vera cried, "I won't drink it." There was a moment's silence, then Lombard laughed. He said it with appreciation. "Good for you, Vera. You've got your wits about you. Even if you have been scared half out of your life, I'll get a fresh bottle that hasn't been opened." He went swiftly out. Vera said uncertainly, "I'm all right now. I'll have some water." Armstrong supported her as she struggled to her feet. She went over to the basin, swaying and clutching at him for support. She let the cold tap run and then filled the glass. Blore said resentfully, "That brandy's all right." Armstrong said, "How do you know?" Blore said angrily, "I didn't put anything in it. If that's what you're getting at, I suppose." Armstrong said, "I'm not saying you did. You might have done, or someone might have tampered with the bottle for just this emergency." Lombard came swiftly back into the room. He had a new bottle of brandy in his hands and a corkscrew. He thrust the sealed bottle under Vera's nose. "There you are, my girl. Absolutely no deception." He peeled off the tinfoil and drew the cork. "Luckily, there's a good supply of spirits in the house." "Thoughtful of you, Owen." Vera shuddered violently. Armstrong held the glass while Philip poured the brandy into it. He said, "You'd better drink this, Miss Claythorne. You had had a nasty shock." Vera drank a little of the spirit. The color came back to her face. Philip Lombard said with a laugh, "Well, here's one murder that hasn't gone according to plan." Vera said almost in a whisper, "You think that was what was meant?" Lombard nodded. "Expected you to pass out through fright. Some people would have, wouldn't they, Doctor?" Armstrong did not commit himself. He said doubtfully, Impossible to say. Young, healthy subject, no cardiac weakness, unlikely. On the other hand..." He picked up the glass of brandy that Bloor had brought. He dipped a finger at it, tasted gingerly. His expression didn't alter. He said, dubiously, tastes all right. Bloor stepped forward angrily. If you're saying that I tampered with that, I'll knock your ruddy block off. Vera, her wits revived by the brandy, made a diversion by saying, Where's the judge? The three men looked at each other. That's odd. Thought he came up with us. Bloor said, So did I. What about it, Doctor? You came up the stairs behind me. Armstrong said, I thought he was following me. Of course. He'd be bound to go slower than we did. He's an old man. They looked at each other again. Lombard said, It's damned odd. Bloor cried, We must look for him. He started for the door. The others followed him, Vera last. As they went down the stairs, Armstrong said over his shoulder, Of course, he may have stayed in the living room. They crossed the hall. Armstrong called out loudly, Wargrave, Wargrave, where are you? There was no answer. Deadly silence filled the house, apart from the gentle patter of the rain. Then, in the entrance to the drawing room, Armstrong stopped dead. The others crowded up and looked over his shoulder. Somebody cried out. Mr. Justice Wargrave was sitting in his high-backed chair at the end of the room, 2 candles burnt on either side of him. But what shocked and startled the onlookers was the fact that he sat there, robed in scarlet, with a judge's wig upon his head. Dr. Armstrong motioned to the others to keep back. He himself walked across to the silent, staring figure, reeling a little as he walked like a drunken man. He bent forward, peering into the still face. Then, with a swift movement, he raised the wig. It fell to the floor, revealing the high, bald forehead with, in the very middle, a round, stained mark from which something had trickled. Dr. Armstrong lifted a lifeless hand and felt for the pulse. Then he turned to the others. He said, and his voice was expressionless, Dead, far away. He's been shot. Bloor said, God, the revolver, Doctor said, still in the same lifeless voice. Got him through the head? Instantaneous. Vera stooped to the wig, she said, and her voice shook with horror. Miss Brent's missing gray wool. Bloor said, and the scarlet curtain that was missing from the bathroom. Vera whispered, So this is what they wanted them for. Suddenly Philip Lombard laughed, a high, unnatural laugh. 5 little soldier boys going in for law. 1 got in chancery, and then there were 4. That's the end of Mr. Bloody Justice Wargrave. No more pronouncing sentence for him. No more putting on the black cap. Here's the last time he'll ever sit in court. No more summing up and sending innocent men to death. How Edward Seton would laugh if he were here. God, how he'd laugh. His outburst shocked and startled the others. Vera cried, Only this morning you said he was the one. Philip Lombard's face changed, sobered. He said in a low voice, I know I did. Well, I was wrong. Here's one more of us who's been proved innocent too late. Chapter 14. They had carried Mr. Justice Wargrave up to his room and laid him on the bed. Then they had come down again and had stood in the hall looking at each other. Bloor said heavily, What do we do now? Lombard said briskly, Have something to eat. We've got to eat, you know. Once again they went into the kitchen, and again they opened a tin of tongue. They ate mechanically, almost without tasting. Vera said, I shall never eat tongue again. They finished the meal. They sat round the kitchen table staring at each other. Bloor said, Only 4 of us now. Who'll be next? What's the next part of the poem? Armstrong stared. He said almost mechanically, We must be very careful. And stopped. Bloor nodded. That's what he said. And now he's dead. Armstrong said, How did it happen, I wonder? Lombard swore, A damned clever double-cross. That stuff was planted in Miss Claythorne's room, and it worked just as it was intended to. Everyone dashes up there thinking she's been being murdered, and so, in the confusion, someone caught the old boy off his guard. Bloor said, Why didn't anyone hear the shot? Lombard shook his head. Miss Claythorne was screaming. The wind was howling. We were running about and calling out. No, it wouldn't be heard. He paused. But that trick's not going to work again. He'll have to try something else next. Bloor said he probably will. There was an unpleasant tone in his voice. The 2 men eyed each other. Armstrong said, 4 of us, and we don't know which. Bloor said, I know. Vera said, I haven't the least doubt. Armstrong said slowly, I suppose I do know, really. Philip Lombard said, I think I've got a pretty good idea now. Again, they all looked at each other. Vera staggered to her feet. She said, I feel awful. I must go to bed. I'm dead beat. Lombard said, might as well. No good sitting watching each other. Blore said, I've no objection. The doctor murmured, the best thing to do, although I doubt if any of us will sleep. They moved to the door. Blore said, I wonder where the revolver is now. They went up the stairs. The next move was a little like a scene in a farce. Every one of the four stood with a hand on his or her bedroom door handle. Then, as though at a signal, each one of them stepped into the room, pulled the door shut, and then there were sounds of bolts and locks and of moving furniture. Four frightened people were barricaded in until morning. Philip Lombard drew a breath of relief as he turned from adjusting a chair under the door handle. He strolled across to the dressing table. By the light of the flickering candle, he studied his face curiously. He said softly to himself, yes, this business has got you rattled, all right. His sudden wolf-like smile flashed out. He undressed quickly. He went over to the bed, placing his wristwatch on the table by the bed. Then he opened the drawer of the table. He stood there, staring down at the revolver that was inside it. Vera Claythorne lay in bed. The candle still burned beside her, and yet she could not summon the courage to put it out. She was afraid of the dark. She told herself again and again, you're all right until morning. Nothing happened last night. Nothing will happen tonight. Nothing can happen. You are locked and bolted in. No one can come near you. And she thought suddenly, of course I can stay here. Stay here locked in. Food doesn't really matter. I can stay here safely till help comes. Even if it's a day or 2 days. Stay here. Yes, but could she stay here, hour after hour, with no one to speak to, with nothing to do but think? She'd began to think of Cornwall, of Hugo, and of what she'd said to Cyril. Horrid, whiny little boy, always pestering her. Miss Claythorne, why can't I swim out to the rock? I can, I know I can. Was it her voice that had answered? Of course you can, Cyril, really, I know that. Can I go then, Miss Claythorne? Well, you see, Cyril, your mother gets so nervous about you. I'll tell you what, tomorrow you can swim out to the rock. I'll talk to your mother on the beach and distract her attention. And then when she looks for you, there you'll be standing on the rock waving to her. It will be a surprise. Oh, good egg, Miss Claythorne. That will be a lark. She'd said it now. Tomorrow Hugo was going to Newquay. When he came back, it would be all over. Yes, but supposing it wasn't, supposing it went wrong, Cyril might be rescued in time, and then he'd say, Miss Claythorne said I could. Well, what of it? One must take some risk. If the worst happened, she'd brazen out. How can you tell such a wicked lie, Cyril? Of course, I never said any such thing. They'd believe her all right. Cyril often told stories. He was an untruthful child. Cyril would know, of course, but that didn't matter. And anyway, nothing would go wrong. She'd pretend to swim out after him, but she'd arrive too late. Nobody would ever suspect. Had Hugo suspected? Was that why he had looked at her in that queer, far-off way? Had Hugo known? Was that why he had gone off after the inquest so hurriedly? He hadn't answered the one letter she had written to him. Hugo. Vera turned restlessly in bed. No, she mustn't think of Hugo. It hurt too much. That was all over and done with. Hugo must be forgotten. Why, this evening, had she suddenly felt that Hugo was in the room with her? She stared up at the ceiling, stared at the big black hook in the middle of the room. She'd never noticed that hook before. The seaweed had hung from that. She shivered as she remembered that cold, clammy touch on her neck. She didn't like that hook on the ceiling. It drew your eyes, fascinated you. A big black hook. Ex-Inspector Blore sat on the side of his bed. His small eyes, red-rimmed and bloodshot, were alert in the solid mass of his face. He was like a wild boar waiting to charge. He felt no inclination to sleep. The menace was coming very near now, 6 out of 10. For all his sagacity, for all his caution and astuteness, the old judge had gone the way of the rest. Blore snorted with a kind of savage satisfaction. What was it the old geezer had said? We must be very careful. Self-righteous, smug old hypocrite. Sitting up in a court, feeling like God Almighty. He'd got his all right. No more being careful for him, and now there were 4 of them. The girl, Lombard, Armstrong, and himself. Very soon another one of them would go, but it wouldn't be William Henry Bloor. He'd see to that all right. But the revolver, what about the revolver? That was the disturbing factor, the revolver. Bloor sat on his bed, his brow furrowed, his little eyes creased and puckered, while he pondered the problem of the revolver. In the silence he could hear the clocks strike downstairs. Midnight. He relaxed a little now, even went so far as to lie down on his bed, but he did not undress. He lay there thinking, going over the whole business from the beginning, methodically, painstakingly, as he had been wont to do in his police officer days. It was thoroughness that paid in the end. The candle was burning down. Looking to see if the matches were within easy reach of his hand, he blew it out. Strangely enough, he found the darkness disquieting. It was as though 1,000 age-old fears woke and struggled for supremacy in his brain. Faces floated in the air, the judge's face crowned with that mockery of gray wool. The cold, dead face of Mrs. Rogers, the convulsed purple face of Anthony Marston, another face, pale spectacle with a small, straw-colored mustache, a face that he had seen some time or other, but when, not on the island, no, much longer ago than that. Funny that he couldn't put a name to it. Silly sort of face, really. Fellow looked a bit of a mug. Of course, it came to him with a real shock. Landor, odd to think he'd completely forgot what Landor looked like. Only yesterday he'd been trying to recall the fellow's face, and hadn't been able to, and now here he was, every feature clear and distinct, as though he had been seen it only yesterday. Landor had had a wife, a thin slip of a woman with a worried face. There had been a kid, too, a girl about 14. For the first time he wondered what had become of them. The revolver, what had become of the revolver? That was much more important. The more he thought about it, the more puzzled he was. He didn't understand this revolver business. Somebody in the house had got that revolver. Downstairs, a clock struck 1. Bloor's thoughts were cut short. He sat up on the bed, suddenly alert, for he had heard a sound, a very faint sound, somewhere outside his bedroom door. There was someone moving about in the darkened house. The perspiration broke out on his forehead. Who was it, moving secretly and silently along the corridors? Someone who was up to no good, he'd bet that. Noiselessly, in spite of his heavy build, he dropped off the bed and with 2 strides was standing by the door listening. But the sound did not come again. Nevertheless, Bloor was convinced that he was not mistaken. He had heard a footfall just outside his door. The hair rose slightly on his scalp. He knew fear again. Someone creeping about stealthily in the night. He listened, but the sound was not repeated, and now a new temptation assailed him. He wanted desperately to go out and investigate. If he could only see who it was prowling about in the darkness, but to open his door would be an action of a fool. Very likely that was exactly what the other was waiting for. He might even have meant Bloor to hear what he had heard, counting on him to coming out to investigate. Bloor stood rigid, listening. He could hear sounds everywhere, now cracks, rustles, mysterious whispers, but his dogged, realistic brain knew them for what they were, the creations of his own heated imagination. And then suddenly he heard something that was not imagination, footsteps, very soft, very cautious, but plainly audible to a man listening with all his ears as Bloor was listening. They came softly along the corridor. Both Lombard's and Armstrong's rooms were further from the stairhead than his. They passed his door, and without hesitating or faltering, and as they did, Bloor made up his mind. He meant to see who it was. The footsteps had definitely passed his door going to the stairs. Where was that man going? When Bloor acted, he acted quickly, surprisingly so for a man who looked so heavy and slow. He tiptoed back to bed, slipped matches into his pocket, detached the plug of the electric lamp by his bed, and picked it up, and winding the flex around it. It was a chromium affair with a heavy ebonite base, a useful weapon. He spirited noiselessly across the room, removed the chair from under the door handle with precaution, unlocked and unbolted the door. He stepped out in the corridor. There was a faint sound in the hall below. Bloor ran noiselessly in his stock stockinged feet to the head of the stairs. At that moment he realized why it was he had heard all these sounds so clearly. The wind had died down completely, and the sky must have cleared. There was a faint moonlight coming in through the landing window, and it illuminated the hall below. Bloor had an instantaneous glimpse of a figure just passing out through the front door. In the act of running down the stairs in pursuit, he paused. Once again, he had nearly made a fool of himself. This was a trap, perhaps to lure him out of the house, but what the other man didn't realize was that he had made a mistake and had delivered himself neatly into Bloor's hands. For of the 3 tenanted rooms upstairs, one must now be empty. All that had to be done was to ascertain which. Bloor went swiftly back along the corridor. He paused first at Dr. Armstrong's door and tapped. There was no answer. He waited a minute, then went on to Philip Lombard's room. Here the answer came at once. Who's there? It's Bloor. I don't think Armstrong is in his room. Wait a minute. He went on to the door at the end of the corridor. Here he tapped again. Miss Claythorne, Miss Claythorne. Vera's voice, startled, answering. Who is it? What's the matter? It's all right, Miss Claythorne. Wait a minute. I'll come back. He raced back to Lombard's room, and the door opened. As he did so, Lombard stood there. He held a candle in his left hand, and he pulled on his trousers over his pajamas. Why does it have the letter Y in there? Pyjamas. His right hand rested in the pocket of his... He said sharply, "What the hell's all this?" Bloor explained rapidly. Lombard's eyes lit up. "Armstrong, eh? So he's our pigeon?" He moved along to Armstrong's door. "Sorry, Bloor, but I don't take anything on trust." He rapped sharply on the panel. Armstrong. There was no answer. Lombard dropped to his knees and peered through the keyhole. He inserted his little finger gingerly in the lock. He said, "The key's not in the door. On the inside," Bloor said. "That means he's locked it on the outside and took it with him." Philip nodded. Ordinary precaution to take. We'll get him, Bloor. This time we'll get him. Half a second." He raced along to Vera's room. "Vera, yes, we're hunting Armstrong. He's out of his room. Whatever you do, don't open your door, understand?" "Yes, I understand." "If Armstrong comes along and says that I've been killed, or Bloor's been killed, pay no attention. See, only open your door if both Bloor and I speak to you. Got that?" Vera said, "Yes, I'm not a complete fool." Lombard said, "Good." He joined Bloor. He said, "And now after him. The hunt's up." Bloor said, "We better be careful. He's got a revolver, remember?" Philip Lombard, racing down the stairs, chuckled. He said, "That's where you're wrong." He undid the front door, remarking, "Latch pushed back so he can get in easily." He went on, "I've got that revolver." He took it half out of his pocket as he spoke. "Found it put back in my drawer tonight." Bloor stopped dead on the doorstep. His face changed. Philip Lombard saw it. "Don't be a damn fool, Bloor. I'm not going to shoot you. Go back and barricade yourself in if you like. I'm off after Armstrong." He stared off into the moonlight. Bloor, after a minute's hesitation, followed him. He thought to himself, "I suppose I'm asking for it after all." After all, he had tackled criminals armed with revolvers before now. Whatever else he lacked, Bloor did not lack courage. Show him the danger, and he would tackle it pluckily. He was not afraid of danger in the open, only of danger undefined and tinged with the supernatural. Vera, left to await the results, got up and dressed. She glanced over once or twice at the door. It was a good solid door. It was both bolted and locked and had an oak chair wedged under the handle. It could not be broken open by force, certainly not by Dr. Armstrong. He was not a physically powerful man. If she were Armstrong's intent on murder, it was cunning that she would employ, not force. She amused herself by reflecting on the means he might employ. He might, as Philip suggested, announce that one of the other 2 men were dead. He might possibly pretend to be mortally wounded himself, might drag himself groaning to her door. There were other possibilities. He might inform her that the house is on fire. More, he might actually set the house on fire. Yes, that would be a possibility. Lure the other two men out of the house, then, having previously laid a trail of petrol, he might set light to it, and she, like an idiot, would remain barricaded in her room until it was too late. She crossed over to the window, not too bad. At a pitch, one could escape that way. It would mean a drop, but there was a handy flower bed. She sat down and, picking up her diary, began to write in it in a clear, flowing hand. One mess passed the time. Suddenly she stiffened to attention. She had heard a sound. It was, she thought, a sound like breaking glass, and it came from somewhere downstairs. She listened hard, but the sound was not repeated. She heard, or thought she had heard, stealthy sounds of footsteps, the creak of stairs, the rustle of garments, but there was nothing definite, and she concluded, as Blore had done earlier, that such sounds had their origin in her own imagination. But presently she heard sounds of a more concrete nature, people moving about downstairs, the murmur of voices, then the very decided sounds of someone mounting the stairs, doors opening and shutting, feet going up to the attics overhead, more noises from there. Finally the steps came along the passage. Lombard's voice said, "Vera, you all right?" "Yes." "What happened?" Blore's voice said. "Will you let us in?" Vera went to the door. She removed the chair, unlocked the door, and slid back the bolt. She opened the door. The two men were breathing hard. Their feet and the bottom of their trousers were soaking wet. She said again, "What happened?" Lombard said, "Armstrong's disappeared." Vera cried, "What?" Lombard said, "Vanished clean off the island." Blore concurred. "Vanished, that's the word, like some damn conjuring trick." Vera said impatiently, "Nonsense, he's hiding somewhere." Blore said, "No, he isn't. I tell you, there is nowhere to hide on this island. It is as bare as your hand. There's moonlight outside, as clear as day, and he is not to be found." Vera said, "He's doubled back to the house." Blore said, "We thought of that. We've searched the house, too." "You must have heard us. He's not here, I tell you. He's gone, clean vanished, vamoosed." Vera said incredulously, "I don't believe it." Lombard said, "It's true, my dear." He paused and then said, "There's one other little fact. A pane in the dining room window has been smashed, and there are only 3 little soldier boys on the table." I don't remember the poem. Okay. Going out to sea, a red herring swallowed one, and then there were 3. Okay, so the rest of it is 3 little soldier boys walking in the zoo. A bear hugged one, and then there were 2. 2 little boys sitting in the sun. One got frizzled up, and then there was 1. Chapter 15. 3 people sat eating breakfast in the kitchen. Outside the sun shone. It was a lovely day. The storm was a thing of the past, and with the change in the weather, a change had come in the mood of the prisoners on the island. They felt now like people just awakening from a nightmare. There was danger, yes, but it was danger in daylight. That paralyzing atmosphere of fear that had wrapped them around like a blanket yesterday, while the wind howled outside, was gone. Lombard said, "We'll try heliographing today with a mirror from the highest point of the island. Some bright lad wandering the cliff will recognize SOS when he sees it, I hope. In the evening we could try a bonfire, only there isn't much wood, and anyway there might just think it was the song and dance of the merriment." Vera said, "Surely someone can read Morse, and then will come and take us off, long before this evening." Lombard said, "The weather's cleared all right, but the sea hasn't gone down yet. Terrific swell on. They won't be able to get a boat near the island before tomorrow." Vera cried, "Another night in this place?" Lombard shrugged his shoulders. "May as well face it. 24 hours will do it, I think. If we can last out that, we'll be all right." Blore cleared his throat. He said, "We'd better come to a clear understanding. What happened to Armstrong?" Lombard said, "Well, we've got one piece of evidence. Only 3 little soldier boys left on the dinner table. It looks as though Armstrong had got his quietus." Vera said, "Then why haven't you found his dead body?" Blore said, "Exactly." Lombard shook his head. He said, "It's damned odd, no getting over it." Blore said doubtfully, "It might have been thrown into the sea." Lombard said sharply, "By who? You? Me? You saw him go out the front door. You come along and find me in the room. We go out and search together. When the devil I had the time to kill him and carry the body around the island." Blore said, "I don't know, but I do know one thing." Lombard said, "What's that?" Blore said, "The revolver. It was your revolver. It's in your possession now. There's nothing to show that it hasn't been in your possession all along. Come now, Blore. We were all searched." "Yes, you hidden it away before that happened. Afterwards, you just took it back again." "My good blockhead, I swear to you that it was put back in my drawer. Greatest surprise I ever had in my life when I found it there." Blore said, "You ask us to believe a thing like that. Why the devil should Armstrong, or anyone else for that matter, put it back?" Lombard raised his shoulders hopelessly. "I have haven't the least idea. It's just crazy. The last thing one would expect. There seems no point in it. Blore agreed. No, there isn't. You might have thought of a better story. Rather proof that I'm telling the truth, isn't it? I don't look at it that way. Philip said, you wouldn't. Blore said, look here, Mr. Lombard, if you're an honest man, as you pretend. Philip murmured, when did I lay claims to being an honest man? No, indeed, I never said that. Blore went on steadily. If you're speaking the truth, there's only one thing to be done. As long as you have the revolver, Miss Claythorne and I are at your mercy. The only fair thing is to put the revolver and other things that are locked up, and you and I will hold the 2 keys. Philip Lombard lit a cigarette. As he puffed the smoke, he said, don't be an ass. You won't agree to that? No, I won't. The revolver's mine. I needed to defend myself, and I'm going to keep it. Blore said, in that case, we're bound to come to one conclusion, that I am you and Owen. Think what you damned will please. But I'll ask you, if that's so, why I didn't pot you over with the revolver last night. I could have, about 20 times over. Blore shook his head. He said, I don't know, and that's a fact. You must have had some reason. Vera had taken no part in the discussion. She stared down and said, I think you're both behaving like a pair of idiots. Lombard looked at her. What's this? Vera said, you've forgotten the nursery rhyme. Don't you see there's a clue there? She recited in a meaning voice. 4 little soldier boys going out to sea. A red herring swallowed one, and then there were 3. She went on, a red herring, that's the vital clue. Armstrong's not dead. He took away the China soldier to make you think he was. You may say what you like, Armstrong's on the island still. His disappearance is just a red herring across the track. Lombard sat down again. He said, you know, you may be right. Blore said, yes, but if so, where is he? We've searched the place, outside and inside. Vera said scornfully, we all searched for the revolver, didn't we? And couldn't find it, but it was somewhere all the time. Lombard murmured, there's a slight difference in size, my dear, between a man and a revolver. Vera said, I don't care. I'm sure I'm right. Blore murmured, rather giving himself away, wasn't it? Actually mentioning a red herring in the verse? He could have written it up a bit different. Vera cried, but don't you see it? He's mad. It's all mad. The whole thing of going by the rhyme is mad. Dressing up the judge, killing Rogers when he was chopping sticks, drugging Miss Rogers so that she overslept herself, arranging for a bumblebee when Miss Brent died. It's like some horrible child playing a game. It's all got to fit in. Blore said, yes, you're right. He thought a minute. At any rate, there's no zoos on the island. We'll have a bit of trouble getting over that. Vera cried, don't you see? We're the zoo. Last night we were hardly human anymore. We're the zoo. They spent the morning on the cliffs, taking in turns to flash a mirror at the mainland. There were no signs that anyone saw them. No answering signals. The day was fine. With a slight haze below, the sea heaved in a gigantic swell. There were no boats out. They had made another abortive search of the island. There was no trace of the missing physician. Vera looked up at the house from where they were standing. She said, her breath coming with a slight catch in it. One feels safer here out in the open. Let's go back into the house again. Lombard said, not a bad idea. We're pretty safe here. No one can get at us without our seeing him a long time beforehand. Vera said, we'll stay here. Blore said, have to pass the night somewhere. We'll have to go back to the house then. Vera shuddered. I can't bear it. I can't go through another night. Philip said, you'll be safe enough locked in your room. Vera murmured, I suppose so. She stretched out her hands, murmuring, it's lovely to feel the sun again. She thought, how odd. I'm almost happy. And yet I suppose I'm actually in danger. Somehow, now, nothing seems to matter. Not in daylight. I feel full of power. I feel that I can die. I feel that I can't die. Blore was looking at his wristwatch. He said, it's 2:00. What about lunch? Vera said obstinately, I'm not going back to the house. I'm going to stay here in the open. Oh, come now, Miss Claythorne. Got to keep your strength up, you know. Vera said, if I even see a tinned tongue, I shall be sick. I don't want any food. People go days on end without nothing sometimes when they're on a diet. Blore said, well, I need my meals regular. What about you, Mr. Lombard? Philip said, you know, I don't relish the idea of tinned tongue particularly. I'll stay here with Miss Claythorne. Blore hesitated. Vera said, I shall be quite all right. I don't think he'll shoot me as soon as your back is turned, if that's what you're afraid of. Blore said, it's all right if you say so. But we agreed we ought not to separate. Philip said, you're the one who wants to go into the lion's den. I'll come with you if you like. No, you won't, said Blore. You'll stay here. Philip laughed. So you're still afraid of me? Why, I could shoot you both this very minute if I liked. Bloor said, yes, but that wouldn't be according to plan. It's one at a time, and it's got to be done in a certain way. Well, said Philip, you seem to know all about it. Of course, said Bloor, it's a bit jumping way up to the house alone. Philip said softly. And therefore will I lend you my revolver? Answer, no, I will not. Not quite so simple as that, thank you. Bloor shrugged his shoulders and began to make his way up the steep slope to the house. Lombard said softly, feeding time at the zoo, the animals are very regular in their habits. Vera said anxiously, isn't it very risky what he's doing? In the sense you mean? No, I don't think it is. Armstrong's not armed, you know, and anyway, Bloor is twice a match for him in physique, and he's very much on his guard. And anyway, it's a sheer impossibility that Armstrong can be in the house. I know he's not there, but what other solution is there? Philip said softly, there's Bloor. Oh, do you really think? Listen, my girl, you heard Bloor's story. You've got to admit that if it's true, I can't possibly have had anything to do with Armstrong's disappearance. His story clears me, but it doesn't clear him. We've only his word for that he heard footsteps and saw a man going downstairs and out the front door. The whole thing may be a lie. He may have got rid of Armstrong a couple hours before that. How? Lombard shrugged his shoulders. That we don't know, but if you ask me, we've only one danger to fear, and that danger's Bloor. What do we know about the man? Less than nothing. All this ex-policeman story may be Buncombe. He may be anybody, a mad millionaire, a crazy businessman, an escaped inmate of Broadmoor. One thing's certain, he could have done every one of these crimes. Vera had gone rather white. She said it in a slightly breathless voice. And supposing he gets us? Lombard said softly, patting the revolver in his pocket. I'm going to take very good care he doesn't. Then he looked at her curiously, touching faith in me. Haven't you, Vera? Quite sure I wouldn't shoot you? Vera said, one has got to trust someone. As a matter of fact, I think you're wrong about Bloor. I still think it's Armstrong. She turned to him suddenly. Don't you feel all the time that there's someone watching and waiting? Lombard said slowly, that's just nerves. Vera said eagerly, Then you have felt it? She shivered. She bent a little closer. Tell me, you don't think... She broke off, went on, I read a story once about two judges that came to a small American town from the Supreme Court. They administered justice, absolute justice, because they didn't come from this world at all. Lombard raised his eyebrows. He said, heavenly visitants? No, I don't believe in the supernatural. This business is human enough. Vera said in a low voice, sometimes I'm not sure. Lombard looked at her. He said, that's conscience. After a moment's silence, he said very quietly, so you did drown that kid after all. Vera said vehemently, I didn't. You've no right to say that. He laughed easily. Oh, yes, you did, my good girl. I don't know why. Can't imagine. There was a man in it, probably. What was that it? A sudden feeling of lassitude, of a tense weariness, spread over Vera's limbs. She said in a dull voice, yes, there was a man in it. Lombard said softly, thanks. That's what I wanted to know. Vera sat up suddenly. She exclaimed, what was that? It wasn't an earthquake. Lombard said, no. Queer, though. A thud shook the ground, and I thought, did you hear a sort of cry? I did. They stared at the house, and Lombard said, it came from there. We'd better go up and see. No, I'm not going. Please yourself, I am. Vera said desperately, all right, I'll come with you. They walked up to the slope of the house. The terrace was peaceful and innocuous looking in the sunshine. They hesitated there a minute, then instead of entering by the front door, they made a cautious circuit of the house. They found Bloor. He was spread-eagled on the stone terrace on the east side, his head crushed and mangled by a great block of white marble. Philip looked up. He said, whose is that window just above? Vera said it in a low, shuddering voice. It's mine, and that's the clock for my mantelpiece. I remember now, it was shaped like a bear. She repeated, and her voice shook and quavered. It was shaped like a bear. Philip grasped her shoulder, he said, and his voice was urgent and grim. "This settles it. Armstrong is in hiding somewhere in that house. I'm going to get him." But Vera clung to him. She cried, "Don't be a fool. It's us now. We're next. He wants us to look for him. He's counting on it." Philip stopped. He said thoughtfully, "There's something in that." Vera cried, "At any rate, you do admit now I was right." He nodded. "Yes, you win. It's Armstrong, all right. But where the devil did he hide himself? We went over the place with a fine-tooth comb." Vera said urgently, "If you didn't find him last night, you won't find him now. That's common sense." Lombard said reluctantly, "Did he hide in your room, Vera?" "Yes, but he must have prepared a secret place beforehand. Naturally, of course. It's just just what he would do, you know. It's like a priest's hole in an old manor's houses. This isn't an old house of that kind. He could have had made one. He could have had one made." Philip Lombard shook his head. He said, "We measured the place the first morning. I'll swear there's no space unaccounted for." Vera said, "There must be." Lombard said, "I'd like to see." Vera cried, "Yes, you'd like to see, and he knows that. He's in there waiting for you." Lombard said, half bringing out the revolver from his pocket, I've got this, you know. You said Bloor was all right, that he was more than a match for Armstrong, so he was physically. And he was on the lookout too, but what you don't seem to realize is that Armstrong is mad, and a madman has all the advantages on his side. He's twice as cunning as anyone sane can be. Lombard put the revolver in his pocket. He said, "Come on, then." Lombard said at last, "What are we going to do when night comes?" Vera didn't answer. He went on accusingly, "You haven't thought of that?" She said helplessly, "What can we do? Oh my God, I'm frightened." Philip Lombard said thoughtfully, "It's fine weather. There will be a moon. We must find a place. Up by the top cliffs. We can sit there and wait for morning. We mustn't go to sleep. We must watch the whole time. And if anyone comes up towards us, I shall shoot." He paused. "You'll be cold, perhaps, in that thin dress." Vera said, with a raucous laugh, "Cold? I should be colder if I were dead." Philip Lombard said quietly, "Yes, that's true." Vera moved restlessly. She said, "I shall go mad if I sit here any longer. Let's move about." "All right." They paced. I gotta stand up for a bit. My back. They paced slowly up and down along the line of the rocks overlooking the sea. The sun was dropping towards the west. The light was golden and mellow. It enveloped them in a golden glow. Vera said with a sudden nervous little giggle, "Pity we can't have a bath." Philip was looking down towards the sea. He said abruptly, "What's that there?" "You see, by the big rock?" "No, a little further to the right." Vera stared. She said, "It looks like somebody's clothes." "A bather, eh?" Lombard laughed. "Queer. I suppose it's only seaweed." Vera said, "Let's go and look." "It is clothes," said Lombard as they drew near. "A bundle of them. That's a boot." "Come on, let's scramble along here." They scrambled over the rocks. Vera stopped suddenly. She said, "It's not clothes, it's a man." The man was wedged between two rocks, flung there by the tide earlier in the day. Lombard and Vera reached it in the last scramble. They bent down. A purple discolored face, a hideous drowned face. Lombard said, "My God, it's Armstrong." Eons passed. Worlds spun, and world time was motionless. It stood still. It passed through 1,000 ages. No, it was only a minute or so. The two people were standing, looking down on a dead man. Slowly, very slowly, Vera Claythorne and Philip Lombard lifted their heads and looked into each other's eyes. Lombard laughed. He said, "So that's it, is it, Vera?" Vera said, "There's no one on the island. No one at all except us two." Her voice was a whisper, nothing more. Lombard said, "Precisely. So we know where we are, don't we?" Vera said, "How was it worked, that trick with the marble bear?" He shrugged his shoulders. "A conjuring trick, my dear. A very good one." Their eyes met again. Vera thought, "Why did I never see his face properly before? A wolf. That's what it is, a wolf's face. Those horrible teeth." Lombard said, and his voice was a snarl, dangerous, menacing. "This is the end, you understand. We've come to the truth now, and it's the end." Vera said quietly, "I understand." Ow. She stared out to the sea. General MacArthur had stared out to sea when only yesterday, or was it the day before? He too had this is the end. He had said it with acceptance. almost with welcome. But to Vera, the words, the thought brought rebellion. No, it should not be the end. She looked down at the dead man. She said, "Poor Dr. Armstrong." Lombard sneered. He said, "What's this, womanly pity?" Vera said, "Why not? Haven't you any pity?" "Ha!" he said. "I have no pity for you. Don't expect it." Vera looked down again at the body. She said, "We must move him, carry him up to the house. To join the other victims, I suppose. All neat and tidy as far as I'm concerned. He can stay where he is," Vera said. "At any rate, let's get him out of the reach of the sea." Lombard laughed. He said, "If you like." He bent, tugging at the body. Vera leaned against him, helping him. She pulled and tugged with all her might. Lombard panted. Not such an easy job. They managed it, however, drawing the body clear of the high water mark. Lombard said as he straightened up. Satisfied? Vera said. Quite. Her tone warned him. He spun around. Even as he clapped his hand to his pocket, he knew that he would find it empty. She had moved a yard or two away and was facing him, revolver in hand. Lombard said, "So that's the reason for your womanly solicitude. You wanted to pick my pocket." She nodded. She held it steadily and unwaveringly. Death was very near to Philip Lombard now. He knew, been nearer. Nevertheless, he was not beaten yet. He said authoritatively, "Give that revolver to me." Vera laughed. Lombard said, "Come on, hand it over." His quick brain was working. Which method? Talk her over, lull her into security, or a swift dash. All his life, Lombard had taken the risky way. He took it now. He spoke slowly, argumentatively. "Now look here, my dear girl, you just listen." And then he sprang, quick as a panther, as any other feline creature. Automatically, Vera pressed the trigger. Lombard's leaping body stayed poised in mid-spring, then crashed heavily to the ground. Vera came warily forward, the revolver ready in her hand. But there was no need of caution. Philip Lombard was dead, shot through the heart. Relief possessed Vera, enormous, exquisite relief. At last it was over. There was no more fear, no more stealing off her nerves. She was alone on the island, alone with 9 bodies. But what did that matter? She was alive. She sat there, exquisitely happy, exquisitely at peace. No more fear. The sun was setting when Vera moved at last. Sheer reaction had kept her immobile. There had been no room in her for anything but the glorious sense of safety. She realized now that she was hungry and sleepy, principally sleepy. She wanted to throw herself on her bed and sleep and sleep and sleep. Tomorrow perhaps they would come and rescue her. But she didn't really mind. She didn't mind staying here, not now that she was alone. Oh, blessed peace. Blessed peace. She got to her feet and glanced up at the house. Nothing to be afraid of any longer, no terrors waiting for her. Just an ordinary, well-built, modern house, and yet a little earlier in the day she had not been able to look at it without shivering. Fear. What a strange thing fear was. Well, it was over now. She had conquered, had triumphed over the most deadly peril. By her own quick-wittedness and adroitness, she had turned the tables on her would-be destroyer. She began to walk up towards the house. The sun was setting. The sky to the west was streaked with red and orange. It was beautiful and peaceful, Vera thought. The whole thing might be a dream. How tired she was, terribly tired. Her limbs ached, her eyelids were drooping. Not to be afraid anymore, to sleep, 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 sleep. To sleep safely, since she was alone on the island, one little soldier boy left all alone. She smiled to herself. She went in at the front door. The house, too, felt strangely peaceful. Vera thought ordinarily one wouldn't care to sleep where there's a dead body, and particularly every bedroom. Should she go to the kitchen and get herself something to eat? She hesitated a moment, then decided against it. She was really too tired. She paused by the dining room door, and then there were still 3 little china figures in the middle of the table. Vera laughed. She said, "You're behind the times, my dears." She picked up 2 of them and tossed them out through the window. She heard them crash on the stone terrace. The 3rd little figure she picked up and held in her hand and said, "You can come with me. We've won, my dear, we've won." The hall was dim and the dying light. Vera, the little soldier, clasped her hand, began to mount the stairs, slowly because her legs were suddenly very tired. One little soldier boy left all alone. How did it end? Oh, yes, he got married, and then there were none. Married, funny. How she suddenly got that feeling again that Hugo was in the house. Very strong, yes, Hugo was upstairs waiting for her. Vera said to herself, "Don't be a fool. You're so tired that you're imagining the most fantastic things." Slowly up the stairs, at the top of them, something fell from her hand, making Hardly any noise on the soft pile of carpet. She did not notice that she had dropped the revolver. She was only conscious of clasping a little china figure. How very quiet the house was, and yet it didn't seem like an empty house. Hugo upstairs, waiting for her. One little soldier boy left all alone. What was that last line again? Something about being married? Or was it something else? She had come now to the door of her room. Hugo was waiting for her inside. She was quite sure of it. She opened the door. She gave a gasp. What was that, hanging from the hook on the middle of the ceiling? A rope with a noose all ready, and a chair to stand upon. A chair that could be kicked away. That was what Hugo wanted. And of course, that was the last line of the rhyme. He went and hanged himself, and then there were none. The little china figure fell from her hands. It rolled unheeded and broke against the fender. Like an automaton, Vera moved forward. This was the end. Here, where the cold, wet hand, Cyril's hand, of course, had touched her throat. You can go to the rock, Cyril. That was what murder was. As easy as that. But afterwards, you went on remembering. She climbed up on the chair, her eyes staring in front of her like a sleepwalker's. She adjusted the noose around her neck. Hugo was there. To see, she did what she had to do. She kicked away the chair. Epilogue. Sir Thomas Legge, Assistant Commissioner at Scotland Yard, said irritably, "But the whole thing's incredible." Inspector Mayne said respectfully, "I know, sir." The AC went on. 10 people dead on an island and not a living soul on it. It doesn't make sense. Inspector Mayne said stolidly, "Nevertheless, it happened, sir." Sir Thomas Legge said, "Damn it all, Mayne. Somebody must have killed him. That's just our problem, sir. Nothing helpful in the doctor's report." "No, sir. Wargrave and Lombard were shot. The first through the head, the second through the heart. Miss Brent and Marston died of cyanide poisoning. Mrs. Rogers died of an overdose of chloral? I don't even know what that... I assume it's a sleeping pill. Rogers' head was split open. Blore's head was crushed. Armstrong died of drowning. MacArthur's skull was fractured by a blow on the back of the head. And Vera Claythorne was hanged. The AC winced. He said, "Nasty business, all of it." He considered for a minute or two. He said irritably, "Do you mean to say that you haven't been able to get anything helpful out of the Sticklehaven people? Dash it, they must know something." Inspector Mayne shrugged his shoulders. "They're ordinary, decent seafaring folk. They know that the island was bought by a man called Owen, and that's about all they do know. Who provisioned the island and made all the necessary arrangements? Man called Morris, Isaac Morris. And what does he say about it all? He can't say anything, sir. He's dead." The AC frowned. "Do we know anything about this Morris?" "Oh, yes, sir. We know about him. He wasn't a very savory gentleman, Mr. Morris. He was implicated in that share-pushing fraud of Benito's 3 years ago. We're sure of that though we can't prove it, and he was mixed up in the dope business, and again, we can't prove it. He was a very careful man, Morris, and he was behind this island business?" "Yes, sir. He put through the sale, though he made it clear that he was buying Soldier Island for a third party, unnamed." "Surely there's something to be found out on the financial angle there." Inspector Mayne smiled. "Not if you knew Morris. He can wrangle figures until the best chartered accountant in the country wouldn't know if he was on his head or his heels. We've had a taste of that in the Benito business. No, he covered his employer's tracks all right." The other man sighed. Inspector Mayne went on. "It was Morris who made all the arrangements down at Sticklehaven, represented himself as acting for Mr. Owen, and it was he who explained to the people down there that there was some experiment on, some bet about living on a desert island for a week, and that no notice was to be taken of any appeal for help from out there." Sir Thomas Legge stirred uneasily. He said, "And you're telling me that those people didn't smell a rat, not even then?" Mayne shrugged his shoulders. He said, "You're forgetting, sir, that Soldier Island previously belonged to a young Elmer Robson, the American. He had the most extraordinary parties down there. I've no doubt the local people's eyes fairly popped out over them, but they got used to it, and they had begun to feel that anything to do with Soldier Island would necessarily be incredible. It's natural, sir, when you come to think of it." The assistant commissioner admitted gloomily that he was supposed it was. Maine said, Fred Narracott, the man who took the party out there, did say one thing that was illuminating. He said he was surprised to see what sort of people these were, not at all like Mr. Robson's parties. I think it was the fact that they were all so normal and so... quiet, that made him override Morris's orders and take out a boat to the island after he'd heard about the SOS signals. When did he and the other men go? The signals were seen by a party of Boy Scouts on the morning of the 11th. There was no possibility of getting out there that day. The men got there on the afternoon of the 12th at the first moment possible to run a boat ashore there. They're all quite positive that nobody could have left the island before they got there. There was a big sea on after the storm. Couldn't someone have swum ashore? It's over a mile to the coast, and there were heavy seas and big breakers inshore. There were a lot of people, Boy Scouts and others on the cliffs, looking outwards toward the island, watching. The AC Society said, What about the gramophone record you found in the house? Couldn't you get a hold of anything there that might help? Inspector Maine, I bet into that. It was supplied by a firm that do a lot of theatrical stuff and film effects. It was sent to Owen Esquire, C/O Isaac Morris, and was understood to be required for the amateur performance as of a hitherto unacted play. The typescript of it was returned with the record. Andrew said, And what about the subject matter? Inspector Maine said gravely, I'm coming to that, sir. He said he cleared his throat. I investigated those accusations as thoroughly as I can, starting with the Rogerses, who were the first to arrive on the island. They were in service of a Miss Brady who died suddenly. Can't get anything definite out of the doctor who attended her. He says that they certainly didn't poison her or anything like that, but his personal belief is that there was some funny business. That she died as a result of neglect on their part. Says it's the sort of thing that's quite impossible to prove. Then there's Mr. Justice Wargrave. That's okay. He was the judge who sentenced Seton. By the way, Seton was guilty, unmistakably guilty. Evidence turned up later after he was hanged, which proved that beyond any shadow of doubt. But there was a good deal of comment at the time. 9 people out of 10 thought Seton was innocent, and that the judge, summing up, had been vindictive. The Claythorne girl, I find, was governess in a family where a death occurred by drowning. However, she doesn't seem to have had anything to do with it, and as a matter of fact, she behaved very well, swam out to the rescue, and was actually carried out to sea and only just rescued in time. Go on, said the AC with a sigh. Maine took a deep breath. Dr. Armstrong, well-known man, he had a consulting room in Harley Street, absolutely straight and above the board in his profession, haven't been able to trace any record of an illegal operation or anything of that kind. It's true that there was a woman called Cleese who was operated on by him way back in 1925 in Lightmoor when he was attached to the hospital there. Peritonitis, and she died on the operating table. Maybe he wasn't very skillful over the op. After all, he hadn't much experience, but after all, clumsiness isn't a criminal offense. There was certainly no motive. Then there's Miss Emily Brent. Girl Beatrice Taylor was in service with her, got pregnant, and was turned out by her mistress, and went and drowned herself. Not a nice business, but again, not criminal. That, said the AC, seems to be the point. You and Owens dealt with cases that the law couldn't touch. Maine went stolidly on with his list. Young Marston was a fairly reckless car driver, had his license endorsed twice, and he ought to have been prohibited from driving, in my opinion. That's all there is to him. The 2 names, John and Lucy Combs, were the 2 kids he had knocked down and killed near Cambridge. Some friends of his gave evidence for him, and he was let off of a fine. Can't find anything definite about General MacArthur. Fine record, war service, all the rest. Arthur Richmond was servicing under him in France and was killed in action. No friction of any kind between them and the general. They were close friends, as a matter of fact, and there were some blunders made about the time. Commanding officers sacrificed men unnecessarily. Possibly this was a blunder of that kind. Possibly, said the AC. Now, Philip Lombard. Lombard has been mixed up in some very curious shows abroad. He sailed very near the law once or twice, got a reputation for daring and for not being over-scrupulous. Sort of fellow who might do several murders in some quiet, out-of-the-way spot. Then we come to Bloor. Maine hesitated. He, of course, was One of our lot. The other man stirred. Bloor said the assistant commissioner forcefully was a bad hat. You think so, sir? The AC said, I always thought so, but he was clever enough to get away with it. It's my opinion that he committed black perjury in the Landor case. I wasn't happy about it at the time, but I couldn't find anything. I put Harris onto it, and he couldn't find anything, but I'm still of the opinion that there was something to find if we had known how to set about it. The man wasn't straight. There was a pause, then Sir Thomas Legay said, And Isaac Morris is dead, you say? When did he die? I thought you'd soon come to that, sir. Isaac Morris died on the night of August 8th. Took an overdose of sleeping stuff, one of the barbiturates. I understand. That wasn't anything to show whether it was accident or suicide. Legay said, come to think of it, care to know what I think, Maine? Perhaps I can guess, sir, Legay said heavily. The death of Morris is a damned sight too opportune. Inspector Maine nodded. He said, I thought you'd say that, sir. The assistant commissioner brought down his fist with a bang on the table. He cried out, the whole thing's fantastic, impossible. 10 people killed on an island, a bare rock of an island, and we don't know who did it, or why, or how. Maine coughed. He said, Well, it's not quite like that, sir. We do know why, more or less. Some fanatic with a bee in his bonnet about justice. He was out to get people who were beyond the reach of the law. He picked 10 people, whether they were really guilty or not, doesn't matter. The commissioner stirred. He said sharply, Doesn't it? It seems to me. He stopped. Inspector Maine waited respectfully with a sigh. Legay shook his head. Carry on, he said. Just for a minute, I felt I'd got somewhere, got, as it were, the clue to the thing. It's gone now. Go ahead with what you were saying. Maine went on. There were 10 people to be executed, let's say. They were executed. Owen accomplished his task, and somehow or another he spirited himself off the island into thin air. The AC said, First-class vanishing trick, but you know, Maine, there must be an explanation. Maine said, You're thinking, sir, that if a man wasn't on the island, he couldn't have left the island. According to the account of the interested parties, he was never on the island. Well, then, the only explanation possible is that he was actually one of the 10. The AC nodded. Maine said earnestly, We thought of that, sir. We went into it. Now, to begin with, we're not quite in the dark as to what happened on Soldier Island. Vera Claythorne kept a diary, so did Emily Brent. Old Wargrave made some notes. Dry, legal, cryptic stuff, but quite clear. And Bloor made notes, too. All those accounts tally. The deaths occurred in this order. Marston, Mrs. Rogers, MacArthur, Rogers, Miss Brent, Wargrave. After his death, Vera Claythorne's diary state that Armstrong left the house in the night and that Bloor and Lombard had gone after him. Bloor has one more entry in his notebook, just 2 words, Armstrong disappeared. Now, sir, it seemed to me, taking everything into account, that we might find a perfectly good solution. Armstrong was drowned, you remember. Granting that Armstrong was mad, what was to prevent him from having killed off all the others and then committed suicide by throwing himself over the cliff, and perhaps while trying to swim to the mainland? That was a good solution. But it won't do. No, sir, it won't do. First of all, there's police surgeon's evidence. He got to the island early on the morning of August 13th. He couldn't say much to help us. All he could say was that 13 people had been dead at least 36 hours, probably a good deal longer, but he was fairly definite about Armstrong. He said he must have been from 8 to 10 hours in the water before his body was washed up. That works out to this. Armstrong must have gone into the sea sometimes during the night of the 10th and 11th, and I'll explain why. We found the point where the body was washed up. It had been wedged between 2 rocks. There were bits of cloth, hair, etc. on them. It must have been deposited there at the high water 11th, so to say, at 11 o'clock a.m. After that, the storm subsided. Succeeding high water marks are considerably lower. You might say, I suppose, that Armstrong managed to polish off the other 3 before he went into the sea that night. But there's another point, and you can't get over. Armstrong's body had been dragged above the high water mark. We found it well above the reach of any tide, and it was laid out straight on the ground, all neat and tidy. So that settles one point definitely. Someone was alive on the island after Armstrong was dead. He paused and then went on. And that leaves just what exactly? Here's the position early on in the morning of the 11th. Armstrong has disappeared, drowned. That leaves us 3 people, Lombard, Bloor, and Vera Claythorne. Lombard was shot. His body was down by the sea near Armstrong's. Vera Claythorne was found hanged in her own bedroom. Bloor's body was on the terrace. His head was crushed in by a heavy marble clock that it seems reasonable to suppose fell on him from the window above. The AC said sharply, "Whose window?" "Vera Claythorne's. Now, sir, let's take each of these cases separately. First, Philip Lombard. Let's say he pushed over that lump of marble onto Bloor. Then he doped Vera Claythorne and strung her up. Lastly, he went down to the shore and shot himself. But if so, who took away the revolver from him? For the revolver was found up in the house, just inside the door, at the top of the stairs. Wargrave's room. The AC said, "Any fingerprints on it?" "Yes, sir. Vera Claythorne's." "But man alive, then?" "I know what you're going to say, sir, that it was Vera Claythorne that she shot Lombard, took the revolver at the house, toppled the marble block on the floor, and then hanged herself. That's quite all right, up to a point. There's a chair in her bedroom, and on the seat on it were marks of seaweed, same as the on her shoes. Looks as though she stood on the chair, adjusted the rope around her neck, and kicked away the chair. But that chair wasn't found kicked over. It was, like all the other chairs, neatly put back against the wall. That was done after Vera Claythorne's death by someone else. That leaves us with Bloor. If you tell me that after shooting Lombard and inducing Vera Claythorne to hang herself, he then went out and pulled down a whacking great block of marble on himself by tying a string to it or something like that, well, I simply don't believe you. Men don't commit suicide that way. What's more, Bloor wasn't that kind of man. We knew Bloor, and he was not the man you'd ever accuse of a desire for abstract justice. The assistant commissioner said, "I agree." Inspector Main said, "And therefore, sir, there must have been someone else on the island. Someone who tidied up when the whole business was over, but where was he all the time? And where did he go? The Sticklehaven people are absolutely certain that no one could have left the island before the rescue boat got there, but in that case he stopped." The assistant commissioner said, "In that case," he sighed. He shook his head, he leaned forward, "But in that case," he said, "who killed them?" A manuscript document sent to Scotland Yard by the master of the Emma Jane fishing trawler. From my earliest youth, I realized that my nature was a mass of contradictions. I have, to begin with, an incredibly romantic imagination. The practice of throwing a bottle into the sea with an important document inside was one that never failed to thrill me when reading adventure stories as a child. It thrills me still, and for that reason I have adopted this course, writing my confession and closing it in a bottle, sealing the latter, and casting it into the waves. There is, I suppose, 100 to 1 chance that my confession may be found, and then, or do I flatter myself, a hitherto unsolved murder mystery will be explained. I was born with other traits besides my romantic fantasy. I have a definite sadistic delight in seeing or causing death. I remember experiments with wasps, with various garden pests. From an early age, I knew very strongly the lust to kill. But side by side with this went a contradictory trait, a strong sense of justice. It is abhorrent to me that an innocent person or creature should suffer or die by any act of mine. I have always felt strongly that right should prevail. It may be understood, I think a psychologist would understand, that with my mental makeup being what it was, I adopted the law as a profession, the legal profession, satisfied nearly all my instincts. Crime and its punishments has always fascinated me. I enjoy reading every kind of detective story and thriller. I have devised, for my own private amusement, the most ingenious ways of carrying out a murder. When in due course I came to preside over a court of law, that other secret instinct of mine was encouraged to develop, to see a wretched criminal squirming in the dock, suffering the tortures of the damned. As his doom came slowly and slowly nearer, was to me an exquisite pleasure. Mind you, I took no pleasure in seeing an innocent man there. On at least 2 occasions I stopped cases where, to my mind, the accused was palpably innocent, directing the jury that there was no case. Thanks, however, to the fairness and efficiency of our police force, the majority of the accused persons who have come before me to be tried for murder have been guilty. I will say here that such was the case with the man Edward Seton. His appearance and manner were misleading, and he created a good impression on the jury. But not only the evidence, which was clear, though unspectacular, but my own knowledge of criminals told me without a doubt that the man had actually committed the crime with which he was charged, the brutal murder of an elderly woman who trusted him. I have a reputation as a hanging judge, but that is unfair. I have always been strictly just and scrupulous in my summing up of a case. All I have done is to protect the jury against the emotional effect of an emotional appeals by some of our more emotional counsel. I have drawn their attention to the actual evidence. For some years past, I have been aware of a change within myself, a lessening of control, a desire to act instead of to judge. I have wanted, let me admit it frankly, to commit a murder myself. I recognized this as the desire of the artist to express himself. I was, or could be, an artist in crime, my imagination sternly checked by the exigencies of my profession, waxed secretly to colossal force. I must commit a murder. And what is more, it must be no ordinary murder. It must be a fantastical crime, something stupendous, out of the common. In that one respect, I have still, I think, an adolescent's imagination. I wanted something theatrical, impossible. I wanted to kill. Yes, I wanted to kill, but incongruous as it may seem to some, I was restrained and hampered by my innate sense of justice. The innocent must not suffer. And then, quite suddenly, the idea came to me, started by a chance remark uttered during casual conversation. It was a doctor to whom I was talking, some ordinary, undistinguished GP, general practitioner. He mentioned casually how often murder must be committed, which the law was unable to touch. And he instanced a particular case, that of an old lady, a patient of his, who had recently died. He was, he said himself, convinced that her death was due to the withholding of a restorative drug by a married couple who attended on her, and who stood to benefit very substantially by her death. That sort of thing, he explained, was quite impossible to prove, but he was nevertheless quite sure of it in his own mind. He added that there were many cases of a similar nature going on all the time, cases of deliberate murder, and all quite untouchable by the law. That was the beginning of the whole thing. I suddenly saw my way clear, and I determined to commit not one, but murder on a grand scale. A childish rhyme of my infancy came back into my mind, the rhyme of the 10 little soldier boys. It had fascinated me as a child of 2. The inexorable diminishment, the sense of inevitability. I began secretly to collect victims. I will not take up space here by going into details of how this was accomplished. I had a certain routine line of conversation which I employed with nearly everyone I met, and the results I got were really surprising. During the time I was in a nursing home, I collected the case of Dr. Armstrong, a violently teetotal sister, who attended on me, being anxious to prove to me the evils of drink, by recounting to me a case many years ago in a hospital, when a doctor under the influence of alcohol had killed a patient on whom he was operating. A careless question as to where the sister in question had trained, etc., soon gave me the necessary data. I tracked down the doctor and the patient mentioned without difficulty. A conversation between 2 old military gossips in my club put me on the track of General MacArthur. A man who had recently returned from the Amazon gave me a devastating resume of the activities of one Philip Lombard, an indignant Mesmiheb in the Majoric recounted for the tale of the Puritan Emily Brent and her wretched servant girl. Anthony Marston, I selected him from a large group of people who had committed similar offenses. His complete callousness and his inability to feel any responsibility for the lives he had taken made him, I considered, a type dangerous to the community and unfit to live. Ex-Inspector Blore came my way quite naturally. Some of my professional brethren discussing the Landor case with freedom and vigor, I took a serious view of his offense. The police, as servants of the law, must be of a high order of integrity, for their word is perforce believed by virtue of their profession. Finally, there was the case of Vera Claythorne. It was when I was crossing the Atlantic. At late one night, the sole occupants of the smoking room were myself and a good-looking young man called Hugo Hamilton. Hugo Hamilton was unhappy. To assuage that unhappiness, he had taken a considerable quantity of drink. He was in the maudlin confidential stage. Without much hope of any result, I automatically started my routine conversational gambit. The response was startling. I can remember his words now. He said, "You're right, murder isn't what most people think. Giving someone a dollop of arsenic, pushing them over a cliff, that sort of stuff." He leaned forward, thrusting his face into mine. He said, "I've known a murderess. Known her, I tell you. And what's more, I was crazy about her. God help me, sometimes. I think I still am. It's hell. I tell you, hell. You see, she did it more or less for me. Not that I ever dreamed. Women are fiends, absolute fiends. You wouldn't think a girl like that, a nice, straight, jolly girl, you wouldn't think she'd do that, would you? That she'd take a kid out to sea and let it drown. You wouldn't think a woman could do a thing like that." I said to him, "Are you sure she did do it?" He said, and in saying it, he seemed suddenly to sober up. "I'm quite sure. Nobody else ever thought of it, but I knew the..." moment I looked at her when I got back after, and she knew that I knew. What she didn't realize was that I loved that kid. He didn't say any more, but it was easy enough for me to trace back the story and reconstruct it. I needed a 10th victim. I found him in a man named Morris. He was a shady little creature. Did you put Morris's body in... No, I don't know. Amongst other things, he was a dope peddler, and he was responsible for inducing the daughter of friends of mine to take drugs. She committed suicide at the age of 21. During all this time of my search, my plan had been gradually maturing in my mind. It was now complete, and the coping stone... I feel like it should be capstone or capping. And the coping stone to it was an interview I had with a doctor in Harley Street. I have mentioned that I underwent an operation. My interview in Harley Street told me another operation would be useless. My medical advisor wrapped up the information very prettily, but I am accustomed to getting at the truth of a statement. I did not tell the doctor of my decision that my death should not be a slow and protracted one, as it would be in the course of nature. No, my death should take place in a blaze of excitement. I would live before I died. And now to the actual mechanics of the crime of Soldier Island. To acquire the island using the man Morris to cover my tracks was easy enough. He was an expert in that sort of thing, tabulating the information I had collected about my prospective victims. I was able to concoct a suitable bait for each. None of my plans miscarried. All of my guests arrived at Soldier Island on the 8th of August. The party included myself. Morris was already accounted for. He suffered from indigestion. Before leaving London, I gave him a capsule to take last thing at night, which had, I said, done wonders for my own gastric juices. He accepted unhesitatingly. The man was a slight hypochondriac. I had no fear that he would leave any uncompromising I had no fear that he would leave any compromising documents or memoranda behind. He was not that sort of man. The order of death upon the island had been subjected by me to special thought and care. There were, I considered, amongst my guests varying degrees of guilt. Those whose guilt was lightest should, I decided, pass out first, and not suffer the prolonged mental strain and fear that the more cold-blooded offenders were to suffer. Anthony Marston and Mrs. Rogers died first, the one instantaneously, the other in a peaceful sleep. Marston, I recognized, was a type born without the feeling of moral responsibility, which most of us have. He was amoral, pagan. Mrs. Roger, I had no doubt, had acted very largely under the influence of her husband. I need not describe closely how those two met their deaths. The police will have been able to work that out quite easily. Potassium cyanide is easily obtained by householders for putting down wasps. I had some in my possession, and it was easy to slip it into Marston's almost empty glass during the tense period after the gramophone recital. I may say that I watched the faces of my guests closely during that indictment, and I had no doubt whatever, after my long court experience, that one and all were guilty. During recent bouts of pain, I had been ordered a sleeping draught, chloral hydrate. It had been very easy for me to suppress this until I had a lethal amount in my possession. When Rogers brought up some brandy for his wife, he set it down on a table, and in passing that table I put the stuff into the brandy. It was easy, for at that time suspicion had not begun to set in. General MacArthur met his death quite painlessly. He did not hear me come up behind him. I had, of course, to choose my time for leaving the terrace very carefully, but everything was successful. As I had anticipated, a search was made of the island, and it was discovered that there was no one on it but our 7 selves. That at once created an atmosphere of suspicion. According to my plan, I should shortly need an ally. I selected Dr. Armstrong for that part. He was a gullible sort of man. He knew me by sight and reputation, and it was inconceivable to him that a man of my standing should actually be a murderer. All his suspicions were directed against Lombard, and I pretended to concur in these. I hinted to him that I had a scheme by which it might be possible to trap the murderer into incriminating himself. Though a search had been made of everyone's room, no search had as yet been made of the persons themselves, but that was bound to come soon. I killed Rogers on the morning of August 10th. He was chopping sticks for lighting the fire and did not hear me approach. I found the key to the dining room door in his pocket. He had locked it the night before. In the confusion of finding Roger's body, I slipped into Lombard's room and abstracted his revolver. I knew that he would have one with him. In fact, I had instructed Morris to suggest as much when he interviewed him. At breakfast, I slipped my last dose of chloral into Miss Brent's coffee when I was refilling her cup. We left her in the dining room. I slipped in there a little while later. She was nearly unconscious, and it was easy to inject a strong solution of cyanide into her. The bumblebee business was really rather childish, but somehow, it pleased me. I liked adhering as closely as possible to my nursery rhyme. Immediately after this, what I had already foreseen happened. Indeed, I believe I suggested it myself. We all submitted to a rigorous search. I had safely hidden away the revolver, and had no more cyanide or chloral in my possession. It was then that I intimated to Armstrong that we must carry our plan into effect. It was simply this: I must appear to be the next victim. That would perhaps rattle the murderer. At any rate, once I was supposed to be dead, I could move about the house and spy upon the unknown murderer. Armstrong was keen on the idea. We carried it out that evening. A little plaster of red mud on the forehead, and red curtain and wool, and the stage was set. The lights of the candles were very flickering and uncertain, and the only person who would examine me closely was Armstrong. It worked perfectly. Miss Claythorne screamed the house down when she found the seaweed, which I had thoughtfully arranged in her room. They all rushed up, and I took up my pose of a murdered man. The effect on them, when they found me, was all that could be desired. Armstrong acted his part in the most professional manner. They carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed. Nobody worried about me. They were all too deadly scared and terrified of each other. I had a rendezvous with Armstrong outside the house at 1:45. I took him up a little way behind the house on the edge of the cliff. I said that here we could see if anyone else approached us, and we should not be seen from the house, as the bedrooms faced the other way. He was still quite unsuspicious, and yet he ought to have been warned. If he had only remembered the words of the nursery rhyme, a red herring swallowed one. He took the red herring all right. It was quite easy. I uttered an exclamation, leant over the cliff, told him to look. Wasn't that the mouth of a cave? He leant right over. A quick, vigorous push sent him off his balance and squash into the heaving sea below. I returned to the house. It must have been my footfall that Blore heard. A few minutes after I had returned Armstrong's room, I left it, this time making a certain amount of noise so that someone should hear me. I heard a door open as I got to the bottom of the stairs. They must have just glimpsed my figure as I went out the front door. It was a minute or two before they followed me. I had gone straight round the house and in at the dining room window, which I had left open. I shut the window, and later I broke the glass. Then I went upstairs and laid myself out again on my bed. I calculated that they would search the house again, but I did not think that they would look closely at any of the corpses. A mere twitch aside the sheets to satisfy themselves that it was not Armstrong's masquerading as a body. This is exactly what occurred. I forgot to say that I returned the revolver to Lombard's room. It may be of interest to someone to know where it was hidden during the search. There was a big pile of tinned food in the larder. I opened the bottommost of the tins, biscuits, I think it contained, bedded the revolver, and replaced the strip of adhesive tape. I calculated and rightly that no one would think of working their way through the pile of apparently untouched foodstuffs, especially as all the top tins were soldered. The red curtain I had concealed by laying it flat on the seat of one of the drawing-room chairs under the chintz cover, and the wool in the seat cushion, cutting a small hole. And now came the moment that I had anticipated. 3 people who were so frightened of each other that anything might happen, and one of them had a revolver. I watched them from the windows of the house. When Blore came up, I had the big marble clock poised, ready. Exit Blore. From my window I saw Vera Claythorne shoot Lombard, a daring and resourceful young woman. I always thought she was a match for him, and more. As soon as that happened, I set the stage in her bedroom. It was an interesting psychological experiment. Would the consciousness of her own guilt, the state of nervous tension consequent on having just shot a man, be sufficient, together with the hypnotic suggestion of the surroundings, to cause her to take her own life? I thought it would. I was right. Vera Claythorne hanged herself before my eyes, where I stood in the shadow of the wardrobe. And now for the last stage. I came forward, picked up the chair, set it against the wall. I looked for the revolver, found it at the top of the stairs where the girl had dropped it. I was careful to preserve her fingerprints on it, and now I shall finish writing this. I shall close it and seal it in a bottle, and I shall throw the bottle into the sea. Why? Yes, why? I'm going to struggle with turning a page. It was my it was my ambition to invent a murder mystery that no one could solve, but no artist, I now realize, can be satisfied with art alone. There is a natural craving for recognition, which cannot be gainsaid. I have, let me confess in it, in all humility, a pitiful human wish that someone should know just how clever I have been. And all this, I have assumed that the mystery of the Soldier Island will remain unsolved. It may be, of course, that the police will be cleverer than I think. There are, after all, 3 clues. 1, the police are perfectly aware that Edward Seton was guilty. They know, therefore, that one of the 10 people on the island was not a murderer in any sense of the word. And it follows, paradoxically, that that person must logically be the murderer. The second clue lies in the 7th verse of the nursery rhyme. Armstrong's death is associated with the red herring which he swallowed, or rather which resulted in swallowing him. That is to say, at this stage of the affair, some hocus pocus is clearly indicated, and that Armstrong was deceived by it and sent to his death. That might start a promising line of inquiry, for at that period there are only 4 persons, and of those 4 I am clearly the only one likely to inspire him with confidence. The third is symbolical. The manner of my death, marking me on the forehead, the brand of Cain. There is, I think, little more to say. After entrusting my bottle and its message to the sea, I shall go to my room and lay myself down on the bed. To my eyeglasses is attached what seems a length of fine black cord, but it is elastic cord. I shall lay the weight of the body on the glasses. The cord I shall loop around the door handle and attach it, not too solidly, to the revolver. What I think will happen is this. My hand, protected with the handkerchief, will press the trigger. My hand will fall to my side. The revolver, pulled by the elastic, will recoil to the door. Jarred by the door handle, it will detach itself from the elastic and fall. The elastic, released, will hang down innocently from the eyeglasses on which my body is lying. A handkerchief lying on the floor will cause no comment whatever. I shall be found laid neatly on the bed, shot through the forehead in accordance with the record kept by my fellow victims. Times of death cannot be stated with any accuracy by the time our bodies are examined. When the sea goes down, there will come from the mainland boats and men, and they will find 10 bodies in an unsolved problem on Soldier Island. Signed, Lawrence Wargrave. Well, I definitely wouldn't have solved that mystery. I hope everyone enjoyed that. And, well, next is The Tragedy of X by Ellery Queen. And then When Cicadas Cry by Carolyn Cleveland, who I think doesn't even know Higurashi or Umineko exist. Anyway, thanks for joining me. I hope everyone has all the hugs and head pats you could ever want or need, and this is your tsundere streamer who doesn't stream, signing out. Bye.